Chapter 2683. 2 days later, Ji Tianxing and his two sons left the blessed enclave together. There were countless divine items and cultivation resources in the blessed enclave. However, they only looted a portion of the precious and rare treasures and resources. They were not interested in those divine items and resources that were made of ordinary materials. The treasures and resources that the three of them looted were mainly metal, ores, and medicinal herbs. The medicinal herbs would be used to refine divine elixirs. The metal ores would be put into the sword world to help the earth spirit race increase their strength and improve their smelting methods. The three of them left the blessed enclave and returned to the surface of the divine planet. Ji Tianxing piloted the battleship and started searching the divine planet with Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang. Marshal Jindong and the 200 captains he had brought with him had died in the blessed enclave. However, there were still more than 60 captains and 6,000 soldiers on the divine planet. They were still searching for resources and hunting down the alien martial gods and space pirates. If they did not kill this group of heaven punishers, it would be a disaster in the future. After all, this group of heaven punishers was large and powerful. No matter which world they invaded, they would be invincible. For the next 2 months, Ji Tianxing had been searching for traces of heaven punishers on the divine planet. At the same time, he looted some precious treasures and resources. During this time, he found more than 50 heaven-punishing battleships. Not only did he destroy those battleships and kill all their captains, but he also killed more than 4,000 soldiers of the heaven punishers. As a result, there was basically no sign of heaven punishers on the surface of the divine planet. However, the number of battleships did not match. There were more than a dozen battleships and more than 1,000 soldiers of the heaven punishers who were missing. Ji Tianxing searched for half a month, but did not find anything. He only found some scattered battleships and corpses. He guessed that the battleships and more than 1,000 soldiers of the heaven punishers had either fled the divine planet or been killed by the alien martial gods and space pirates. Since that was the case, he did not waste any more time and left the divine planet. A few days later, Tianxing's battleship left the scattered star seas and returned to the Five Elements world. By long, Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang returned to the Nine Heavens 10 Absolutes Tower to cultivate in seclusion. The four divine beasts had also entered the divine pagoda and were recuperating in seclusion in the distorted space-time. Ji Tianxing checked the treasures and resources he had plundered from the divine planet. Then, he controlled the Five Elements world and continued to roam the Azure Sun galaxy. Half a month later, the world of Five Elements crossed the dark void and disappeared into the boundless darkness. The shining God star was still floating in the void, slowly aging and weakening. There were still a lot of treasures and resources left on the divine planet, which benefited the martial gods and space pirates of the Green Sun Galaxy. If nothing unexpected happened, a large group of martial gods would soon rush to the divine planet to plunder resources. When all the divine treasures and resources on the divine planet were taken away, the divine planet would deteriorate and age faster. Perhaps after a few thousand years, or even tens of thousands of years, half of the divine star would turn into dust and disappear forever. In the blink of an eye, another 2 years had passed. During this time, the Five Elements world had flown more than 20 billion miles in the void. Ji Tianxing had saved 9 more worlds and killed nearly 300 martial gods and more than 30,000 soldiers. He had also encountered 2 planets that were rich in resources but lifeless. He had used the power of the worlds to devour them. After refining the 2 stars, his strength had reached the peak of perfection and had increased by 2 times. However, he was still at the peak of the true God realm and could not break through to the heavenly God realm. 2 years had passed in the outside world. The 4 divine beasts had been recuperating in the distorted space-time for 100 years. Their injuries had all healed. Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang's strength had also broken through to the true God realm. Ji Tianxing did not forget his previous promise to teach Ji Wushuang the star explosion divine technique. Yin Yao and Ji Ku had been cultivating in seclusion in the distorted space-time. The five elements world had been roaming in the void for more than 10 years, but the two of them had been cultivating for 700 years. Their strength had finally caught up to Ji Tianxing and reached the 9th level of the true God realm. Even if they continued to cultivate in seclusion, they would not be able to increase their strength. They could only strengthen their foundation of the divine Tao and make their divine power more powerful and vast. Therefore, the two of them ended their seclusion and accompanied Ji Tianxing to kill the heaven punishers and save the various worlds. 3 years later, the five elements world had reached the center of the Azure Sun galaxy and was close to the Azure Sun planet. At the same time, the news of the death of Marshal Dong and more than 200 captains had already spread throughout the Azure Sun galaxy. Almost all the heaven punishers in the great worlds knew about this. The martial gods and generals of the heaven-slaying sect were filled with anxiety and worry. Fortunately, the East Expedition Fleet still had a deputy marshal guarding the Azure Sun planet. This person's name was Shun Yang, and his strength was second only to Marshal Dong. He had reached the 5th level of the true God realm. Normally, the East conquering marshal had a lot of authority, and he controlled the affairs of the entire fleet. Although Shun Yang was the deputy marshal in name, he did not have much real power. He was only equivalent to Marshal Dong's assistant and advisor. Ever since Marshal Dong had died, Deputy Marshal Shun Yang was not sad. Instead, he was secretly glad. He could finally take the position and control the entire fleet. From today onwards, he would take the position and change his name to Marshal Ruyang. The 3,000 battleships of the East Expedition Fleet, more than 300,000 heaven punishers, and more than 400,000 puppet soldiers were all under his control. In just half a month, Admiral Zhuiyang had pacified the morale of the soldiers under his command and taken over the military affairs of the fleet, taking full control of it. The generals and captains guarding the various worlds were all anxious and worried. They all sent messages to Marshal Ruyang to ask for countermeasures. Marshal Ruyang did not hesitate to give orders to deploy the troops. Those planets that did not have enough resources or had not been conquered were temporarily abandoned. The remaining 200 battleships took more than 20,000 heaven punishers and returned to the Azure Sun planet. As a result, there were as many as 360 battleships guarding the Azure Sun planet and more than 60,000 heaven punishers. Marshal Ruyang led many captains to strengthen the Azure Sun planet's divine light shield and added many defense divine arrays to the heaven punishing temple. In just 2 years, the defense of the Azure Sun planet had increased by 3 times. Everyone knew that Marshal Ruyang wanted to defend the Azure Sun planet against Ji Tianxing's sudden attack. After all, Ji Tianxing had come aggressively, and his methods were ruthless. He could even kill the Eastern Marshal. How strong was he? Marshal Ruyang guessed that Ji Tianxing would come to the Azure Sun planet. However, there was no way he would run away without a fight. If he did, he would be severely punished by the Heaven Punishers and become the laughingstock of the Heaven Punishers. In the past 2 years, Marshal Ruyang had not only strengthened the defense of the Azure Sun planet and the Heaven Punishing Temple, but he had also deployed the corresponding countermeasures and plans. He had built the Black Sun into an impregnable fortress. The 360 martial gods and 60,000 elite warriors were also united and had high morale. Now, Marshal Ruyang had prepared everything. He was sitting in the Heaven Punishing Temple, waiting for Ji Tianxing to come and die. Chapter 2684. The void was dark, cold, and dead silent. The dazzling golden 5 elements world silently approached the Black Sun, its speed gradually slowing down. Looking at it from billions of miles away, the huge Black Sun hung quietly in the void. The size of this planet was only 30% smaller than the 5 elements world. Among the many stars in the Azure Sun galaxy, this was already the largest star in terms of size. The entire surface of the planet was protected by a thick green light, like a dark green sun. This was how the Black Sun got its name. Around the Black Sun, in the void hundreds of millions of miles away, There were more than a dozen planets of different sizes. Those stars, big or small, were all barren stars without life. They were like loyal guards, guarding the black sun firmly. Ji Tianxing, Yin Yao, and Ji Ku stood on the golden light barrier of the five elements world and looked at the black sun from afar. The black sun's position and the surrounding planets are much better than the purple cloud planet. If there's a heavenly god-level powerhouse, he can set up powerful divine formations and astral divine cannons on the surrounding 16 planets and turn them into satellites of the black sun. Once there's an invasion, the 16 satellites will be able to detect the enemy's movements in advance and launch attacks and interceptions. Yin Yao and Ji Ku both understood that the so-called satellites referred to the guardian planets. Yin Yao nodded slightly in agreement. Ji Ku shook his head with a smile and said, "If it's a god from the upper realm, he'll naturally do that. However, this is the mortal world. Under the heavenly axiom, no one can break through to the heavenly god level, so no one can use that kind of divine power. Moreover, even if there's an invasion, there'll only be martial gods and true gods. The black sun's divine light barrier alone is enough to stop most true gods." Indeed, whether it was the black sun or the purple cloud planet, the divine light barrier formed by the heavenly axiom was a heavenly god-level defense. 99% of true gods could not break through the divine light barrier. Only peerless powerhouses like Ji Tianxing and the great Emperor of Heaven Punisher, who had special opportunities and techniques, could break through the divine light barrier and invade the various planets. Ji Ku's words made Ji Tianxing feel a little emotional. If it weren't for the Heaven Punisher race causing chaos in the 3,000 worlds, we would have ascended to the divine world and become heavenly gods. Only after reaching the heavenly god realm and condensing a godhead could one be considered a true god. At that time, I'll be able to use all kinds of divine abilities. Yin Yao nodded again and said in a low voice, "Yes, we can ascend and leave. The grudges of this mortal world have nothing to do with us." However, the heaven-destroying race had their eyes on the five elements world. They were determined to invade and even destroy it. Our parents, relatives, and friends will also be enslaved by the Heaven Crushers, or even slaughtered. Moreover, the Heaven Punishers had powerful gods supporting them, so they could avoid the laws of heaven and avoid the 9 heavenly tribulations. All signs indicated that the Heaven Punisher race and the God Spirit behind them were plotting something. No matter what, we have to destroy the Heaven Punisher race before we can ascend with peace of mind. Seeing the gloomy atmosphere, Ji Ku comforted them. "Big brother Tianxing, eldest senior sister, you don't have to worry too much. With our current strength, we are invincible in the galaxy. As long as we sweep through the 3 major star zones and reach the Heaven Punisher planet, it will be the end of the Heaven Punisher race. At most, in a few decades, we will be able to destroy the Heaven Punisher race and successfully ascend to the divine world." Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "That's right. That's my plan. Let's not talk about this for now. Let's deal with the Black Sun first. Although we have plundered a large amount of treasures and resources from the divine world and killed Marshal Dong and many other Heaven Punisher martial gods, there is still Marshal Dong. These conquering fleet still has a vice marshal called Xian Yang, who is overseeing the Black Sun. After Marshal Dong is killed, Xian Yang will definitely take over the marshal's position and control the situation. We have to kill him and save the Black Sun. Only then can we intimidate the East conquering fleet." Yin Yao thought for a moment and said, "The 3 of us will go to the Black Sun. There's no need to bring the others. The 4 divine beasts have just recovered from their injuries. They still need to cultivate in seclusion for a while. Wuhan and Wushuang have just broken through to the true immortal realm. They still need to cultivate and stabilize their divine Tao foundation. Bai Long needs to stay in the 5 elements world to prevent any accidents." Ji Tianxing and Ji Ku both agreed with her arrangement. One day later, the 5 elements world slowed down to the lowest speed and stopped in the void 100 million miles away from the Black Sun. Ji Tianxing took out the Tianxing battleship and flew toward the Black Sun with Yin Yao and Ji Ku. 100 million miles was considered very close to the two massive stars. However, it was an extremely long journey for ordinary immortals. Even though the Tianqing battleship's flying speed was comparable to that of a heavenly god realm elite, Ji Tianqing and the other two used 10 days to reach the Black Sun. When the Tianqing battleship landed on the blue light barrier, Ji Tianqing immediately felt that something was wrong. How can the divine light barrier of the Black Sun be so thick? Its power is twice as strong as the barrier of the purple cloud planet. Could it be that the heavenly Tao is taking special care of the Black Sun? No, it must be that the heaven punishers on the Black Sun have strengthened the divine light barrier. Yin Yao and Ji Ku also noticed this. After careful observation, they came to a conclusion. That's right. The divine light barrier of the Black Sun has been strengthened by someone. I've already sensed that there are many divine arrays inside the divine light barrier and the aura of the heaven punishers. Yun Yao was very sensitive to the aura of power. Marshal Ruyang and the heaven punishers' deployment could not escape her detection. Ji Ku looked at Ji Tianqing and asked, "Brother Tianqing, is there a way to enter the Black Sun? Will it be very troublesome?" Ji Tianqing smiled and shook his head. He took out the sword of burial of heaven and said, "No matter how strong it is, it's still a heavenly god-level barrier. With the origin stone divine sword in hand, there's no pressure at all." Then, he used the divine eye secret technique and carefully observed the azure barrier. Half a day later, he found an area where the power was slightly weaker and started to break the barrier. With the help of the sword of burial of heaven, he only used 1 day to break a hole in the azure barrier. A hole that was 3 meters in diameter and 10 feet deep appeared in front of the three of them. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Ji Tianqing and the others passed through the passage-like hole and entered the Black Sun. At the same time, on the Black Sun, high above the boundless sky ocean, in the golden heaven punisher divine palace, a large array that monitored the divine light barrier suddenly flashed with purple light and issued a warning. A moment later, the heaven punisher martial god, who was guarding the divine array, noticed something unusual and quickly reported it to Marshal Riyang. Marshal Riyang, who had been recuperating for a long time, was instantly filled with fighting spirit and gave the order to gather. When the news spread, the entire Heaven Punisher Divine Palace was awakened. Many Heaven Punisher martial gods and guards gathered on the plaza and waited for Marshal Ruyang's orders. A well-planned hunting operation that had been premeditated for a long time was thus kicked off. Chapter 2685. The Black Sun was a foreign world that Ji Tianqing had never been to before. Swing, thumbing, thumb. After entering the Black Sun, the three of them did not act rashly. They knew that Marshal Ruyang was prepared and had even strengthened the defenses. Why would they attack rashly? Ji Tianqing brought Yun Yao and Ji Ku to a continent. After some small tricks, the three of them disguised themselves and sneaked into a bustling main city. More than 2 million martial artists and civilians lived in the city with a radius of 300 miles. A heaven-conquering martial god and more than 30 heaven-conquering warriors were guarding the prosperous city. The martial artists and civilians in the city had become slaves of the martial gods. In recent decades, the slaves had been oppressed by the martial gods. Not only were all their cultivation resources and belongings confiscated, but they also had to work hard every day and night to collect cultivation resources. Ji Tianqing, Yun Yao, and Yun Yao remained invisible and easily snuck into the city governor's mansion. They captured the martial god guarding the mansion. The martial god was a captain and only had the strength of a 4th-level martial god. Ji Tianqing captured him easily and did not give him a chance to escape or send a message. He did not even make a sound. However, Ji Tianqing performed the soul-searching secret technique and took away the martial god's memory. As a result, not only did he learn about the situation on the Black Sun, but he also learned about Marshal Ruyang's plan. The Black Sun has 4 continents and 18 divine kingdoms, which are controlled by 9 generals and 72 martial gods of the heavens. We're in Windwell City on the waning moon continent. The Heaven Palace built by Marshal Jindong is in the sky ocean between the waning moon continent and the wind frost continent. This poor guy has low strength and status. He's only been to the Heaven Palace once. As he spoke, Ji Tianxing casually shot out a ball of golden flames and burned the unconscious heaven-defying martial god to ashes. Yin Yao frowned and asked, Tianxing, how many martial gods are there on the Black Sun? Should we attack the heaven-punishing divine palace directly, or should we assassinate the martial gods one by one? Ji Tianxing fused with the memories of the Lord of Windwell City and replied without hesitation. After Marshal Riyang took control of the power, he guessed that I would come to deal with him. Therefore, he withdrew a large number of martial gods and warriors and strengthened the defenses of the Black Sun and the heaven-punishing divine palace. Currently, there were 360 martial gods and 60,000 heaven crusaders on the Black Sun. Among them, there were 60 martial gods and 20,000 soldiers of the heavenly expedition guarding the 4 continents. The remaining 300 martial gods and 40,000 heaven-punishing warriors are all waiting for orders in the heaven-punishing divine palace. Ji Ku also frowned. He said gravely, in that case, Marshal Riyang wants to defend the heaven-punishing divine hall and fight us there? Ji Tianxing thought for a moment and shook his head. That's not necessarily true. Marshal Riyang has already made sufficient preparations. It won't be that simple. It's just that only he knows what his plan is. After pausing for a moment, he added another sentence. A year ago, Marshal Ruyang led over 100 martial gods and set up a large number of divine arrays on the Azure Light Barrier. Among them, there were many divine arrays that monitored the movements of the Azure Light Barrier. Once the Azure Light Barrier was destroyed and an expert invaded, the divine arrays in the heaven-punishing divine palace would sound the alarm. The Lord of Windwell City happened to be involved in setting up the divine arrays, so he knew about this. Yin Yao frowned and said in a low voice, in that case, Marshal Riyang must know that we are here. If he is vigilant enough, he can even use some divine arrays to monitor our location. Ji Tianxing nodded. Maybe. Marshal Ruyang is not as strong as Marshal Jindong, but he is very cautious. Ji Ke raised his eyebrows and said with a playful smile, it seems that this will be a head-on battle. What's there to be afraid of? Ji Tianxing did not think much of it and was full of confidence. Yin Yao asked, now we already know the layout of the Black Sun planet and the approximate location of the heaven-punishing divine palace. Should we continue to operate in the waning moon continent or go directly to the heaven-punishing divine palace? Of course we should go to the heaven-punishing divine palace and wipe out the heaven punishers, Ji Tianxing said with a serious face. If the 3 of us can't even take care of these small fries, how can we go to the heaven-punishing divine palace and wipe out the heaven punishers? He had already made his decision. Yin Yao and Ji Ke naturally agreed and would not stop him. Then, the 3 of them left Windwell City quietly and flew toward the east. The Wind Frost continent was to the east of the waning moon continent. Between the 2 continents was the boundless sky sea. In order to reach the sky sea as soon as possible, Ji Tianxing steered the battleship and sped through the sky. In just 3 days, the battleship left the waning moon continent and entered the sky sea. Not only were there billions of fish and prawns in the boundless sky sea, but there were also many powerful sea beasts. When the battleship flew over the sky sea, Ji Tianxing and the other 2 saw many sea beasts that were as big as mountains. They cut through the waves and fought with their lives in the sky sea. Of course, to the 3 of them, who were peak true gods, this was a small scene. If there were any ignorant sea beasts that dared to attack them, they would definitely be blasted into pieces. Before they knew it, another day had passed. At that moment, the sun was shining brightly and the sky sea was turbulent. All of a sudden, 3 heaven-slicing battleships flew over from the front. They were arranged in a triangular formation as they sped toward them. Ji Tianxing noticed them, but he did not intend to avoid them. Instead, he sped up and charged toward them. Swoosh! Tianxing's battleship turned into a ray of black light and shot across the sky at lightning speed, crashing into the battleship in the middle. The three battleships noticed Tianqing's battleship and paused for a while. Then, they opened the main cannons at the front of the battleship and shot out blinding purple light beams. Boom! 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 Three giant purple light beams with great power blasted toward Tianqing's battleship. When the purple light beams approached, Tianqing's battleship suddenly flipped a few times and suddenly descended 300 feet, dodging the attack of the light beams. In the next moment, Tianqing's battleship crashed into the heaven-punishing battleship in the middle. Boom! Crack! In the deafening sound, the heaven-punishing battleship that was 1,000 feet long was smashed into pieces. More than half of the heaven-punishing warriors in the battleship were killed or injured. They fell into the sky, sea-like dumplings. The leader of the golden armor battleship was also injured. He fell into the sky and quickly turned around to run away. Before Ji Tianqing could say anything, Yun Yao and Ji Ke flew out of the battleship and attacked with their divine swords and spears. Swoosh! 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 Sword radiance flashed, and spears covered the sky. In just 3 breaths, Yun Yao and Ji Ke killed all the heaven-punishing warriors who were lucky enough to survive. The injured golden armor battleship was also stabbed by Ji Ke's spear, and his body exploded. The other 2 heaven-punishing battleships were scared out of their wits when they saw this scene. They turned around and ran away in a hurry. Yin Yao and Ji Ke returned to Tianqing's battleship. Ji Tianqing quickly piloted the battleship and started to chase after them. The 2 parties sped over the sea like 3 rays of black light shooting across the sky. The distance between the 2 of them was constantly shrinking. Chapter 2686. In order to escape, the 2 heaven-conquering battleships pushed their power to the maximum. They lit up with a dazzling purple light, dragging long purple flames behind them. As time passed, the distance between the 2 sides continued to shrink. 200 kilometers, 180 kilometers, 150 kilometers, 120 kilometers. After 15 minutes, the distance between the 2 sides had shrunk to about 20 kilometers. At such a close distance, the 2 heaven-conquering battleships were already within the attack range of Tianqing's battleship. Ji Tianqing decisively opened the main cannon of the heaven-conquering battleship and blasted out a dazzling golden beam of light. Boom! Following a loud explosion, the 10,000 feet long golden beam of light with destructive power blasted toward the heaven-conquering battleship on the left. Ji Tianqing and the others were surprised by what happened next. The heaven-conquering battleship on the left knew that it had been locked onto and had nowhere to run. Before it died, it actually released 3 dazzling purple beams of light that blasted toward the heaven-conquering battleship on the right. Kaboom! In the next instant, a deafening explosion erupted. The golden beam of light blasted the heaven-conquering battleship on the left into smithereens, bursting into golden flames. The entire heaven-conquering battleship was destroyed. Hundreds of heaven-conquering battleships and the captain of the golden armor battleship were blasted into smithereens. However, at the same time, the 3 purple beams of light struck the heaven-conquering battleship on the right. Bam! Following a muffled explosion, the heaven-conquering battleship was forcefully pushed 50 kilometers away. Furthermore, after the 3 purple beams of light were absorbed, its speed also doubled. In the blink of an eye, the heaven-conquering battleship on the right had traveled 500 kilometers, leaving Tianqing's battleship in the dust. There's such a thing? Ji Ke's eyes widened as he looked at the heaven-conquering battleship with a shocked expression. Yin Yao also frowned and said in a low voice, the heaven-conquering battleship on the left knew that it was going to die, so it helped its teammate before it died. It looks like they were already prepared and planned. Ji Tianqing said in a playful tone, You mean they were bait released by Marshal Ruyang to lure us into an ambush? Yin Yao nodded and said, It's possible. Huh? Ji Tianqing chuckled and said, If that's the case, then I'll have to keep the battleship and not destroy it immediately. After all, it still has to lead us to Marshal Ruyang and the heaven-destroying army. Upon hearing this, Yun Yao and Jiku understood what he meant and gripped their divine swords and divine spears tightly. Very quickly, 2 hours passed. A huge island appeared in front of them. The island was formed by pitch-black reefs, with a circumference of over 1,000 miles, standing alone on the ocean surface. The island was covered with a primitive jungle, and it was extremely dense. The heaven-slicing battleship, which was fleeing in panic, unleashed the last of its strength and charged towards the island without regard for anything else. Shwa! A few breaths later, the heaven-slicing battleship entered the island and disappeared into the depths of the forest. At this time, Tianxing's battleship flew across the sky unhurriedly and flew towards the island. When they were 200 miles away from the island, Yun Yao and Ji Ku both raised their eyebrows, and a cold light flashed in their eyes. Tianxing, there are more than a dozen heaven-slicing battleships 50 miles under the sea to our left. Brother Tianxing, there are also more than a dozen heaven-slicing battleships hidden in the depths of the sea to our right. Ji Tianxing nodded to show that he understood. He pointed to the top of his head and chuckled. There are also more than a dozen heaven-slicing battleships hidden in the sky above us. Obviously, this is an ambush arranged by Marshal Ruyang, and he's waiting for us to take the bait. Although he said so, he had no intention of slowing down. He controlled the battleship to continue flying towards the island. Yun Yao couldn't help but ask, since we've already discovered them, why are we still entering the island? Tianxing, aren't you worried that Marshal Ruyang has some kind of killer move? Ji Tianxing said calmly, he's just a fifth heaven true god and 300 heaven-slicing battleship captains. What kind of killer move can he have? Unless the heaven-slicing great emperor, the emperor's son, and the queen goddess are lying in ambush here at the same time, they won't be a threat to us. The rest of the heaven-slicing battleships are all useless. When he finished speaking, Tianxing's battleship had already flown to the top of the island and stopped in the air above a vast forest. At this time, a purple light shot up into the sky around the island, and a barrier that covered the sky appeared. Swoosh! In just 2 breaths, the dark purple light barrier covered a radius of 1,000 miles and sealed the entire island. This was a super divine formation that was made up of 9 great formations. Its power was infinitely close to the heavenly god tier. After the formation was activated, a majestic divine power pressed down and froze the space within 1,000 miles. Then, purple lights lit up under the sea and in the sky around the island. Swoosh! 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 Hundreds of heaven-slicing battleships descended from the sky like huge black beasts and surged out from the sea. After a while, the numerous battleships formed a huge circle and surrounded the island. Every battleship opened up the divine cannons on the side and aimed hundreds of cannons at the island. One after another, captains in golden armor appeared in the sky with more than 100 heaven-slicing battleships. Suddenly, the sky around the island was filled with battleships filled with murderous intent. Tens of thousands of warriors in black armor stood in the sky. They held swords, spears, swords, and halberds in their hands and stared at the island covetously. The scene in front of him was not out of Ji Tianxing's expectations. He remained calm as he scanned the sky indifferently and said, 160 battleships and 30,000 heaven-slicing battleships. It looks like a few dozen battleships have been sent out as bait. There are also 100 battleships and 10,000 heaven-slicing battleships. They are Marshal Ruyang's trump cards and are guarding the heaven-slicing divine palace. Ji said in a serious tone, Brother Tianxing, the other party has set up a divine formation and so many people in ambush. What's your plan? Ji Tianxing shook his head and said, in the face of absolute power, these schemes and tricks are useless. I don't have a plan. I'll just act according to the situation and slaughter to my heart's content. Ji Ku and Yun Yao looked at each other, and both of them revealed a helpless expression. Just as the 3 of them were talking, a black battleship that was 20,000 feet long and looked like a giant shark descended from the sky and landed in the fleet. Swoosh! This ferocious-looking and domineering battleship was Marshal Ruyang's battleship. The captains in golden armor and heaven-slicing battleships looked at the marshal's battleship and bowed slightly to show their respect. After the battleship stopped, the huge and heavy cabin door opened. Ka. A skinny, purplish-black man walked out of the battleship. He was wearing a dark golden helmet, purple armor, and a dark golden cape. He exuded a domineering and majestic aura. 8 heaven-slicing martial gods in golden armor followed behind him with swords and sabers hanging from their waists. They were obviously his guards. This skinny heaven-slicing martial god was Marshal Ruyang. He stood proudly in the sky and stared at Tianxing's battleship on the island with a smug smile. Chapter 2687. Ji Tianxing, welcome to the Black Sun planet. Bun Shuai has been waiting for you for more than 2 years. You are finally here. Marshal Ruyang laughed coldly. His voice reverberated in the air above the island. For many years, there have been legends about you in our tribe. It is said that you killed the southern and eastern marshals and slaughtered hundreds of thousands of our soldiers. Now, it seems that the rumors are exaggerated. With your ability and intelligence, Bun Shuai wonders how you managed to survive until today. More than 100 golden armored warship captains and 30,000 soldiers stared at the Tianxing warship on the island. Hearing Marshal Qing Yang's words, everyone sneered disdainfully and mockingly. A few generals even waved their swords and shouted, "Bastard Ji Tianxing, come out and face your death." Ji Tianxing, you must be terrified and desperate right now, right? Ha! Little bastard, only death awaits you if you go against our tribe. Marshal Ruyang is here. Tianxing, you little brat, kowtow and surrender. Ji Tianxing, do you dare to show yourself and fight? The crowd's shouts ignited the blood of many soldiers. Their fighting spirit soared. At the same time, inside the Tianxing warship, Ji Tianxing told Yin Yao and Ji Ku, "Ku, you will control the warship. Yao, you will fight with me." Ji Ku knew that it was safer to stay in the warship. She quickly objected and said firmly, "Brother Tianxing, I will fight with you. Let senior sister control the warship." Before Ji Tianxing could say anything, Yin Yao shook her head and refused. She said calmly, "Ku, the 3 of us are the most important people to each other. We are bound together for good or ill. No matter who it is, nothing will happen to them. On top of that, Tianxing needs my cooperation to cast the heavenly deity skill and break the sealing formation." Jiku was at a loss for words. He was filled with worry. Ji Tianxing and Yin Yao didn't say anything more and flew out in a flash. Shua, the husband and wife, appeared together and stood high in the sky, looking down at Marshal Ruyang from above. Both of them were dressed in white. Their sleeves fluttered in the wind, and their auras were noble and elegant, just like the gods of the 9 heavens. The tens of thousands of pairs of eyes around the island immediately focused on the 2 of them. Ji Tianxing looked at Marshal Ruyang indifferently and sneered. "Ruyang, is this island the place you chose to bury yourself? Ha! More than 30,000 people will be buried with you. Your life is worth it." His domineering voice spread over a radius of 1,000 miles. The 30,000-plus people could clearly hear the fluent language of the Heaven Punisher. Many of the Heaven Punisher soldiers were instantly enraged. They started to curse and roar. Marshal Ruyang furrowed his brows. Then his brows relaxed, and he sneered disdainfully. "I've long heard that your strength isn't that great, but your tone is extremely arrogant. Today I see that it's true. Bun Shuai really can't understand. You're already surrounded and about to be turned into ashes under the bombardment of thousands of cannons. How can you still have the courage to talk nonsense here? Instead of arguing, why don't you just stretch out your neck and commit suicide on the spot? That way, you could die a more dignified death. Moreover, Bun Shuai will be merciful and let go of your 2 wives. Bun Shuai will take your head and ask the great emperor for a reward. After Bun Shuai's meteoric rise, he will definitely take good care of your wives." Ji Tianxing sneered contemptuously. His voice was so loud that it could pierce through gold and crack rocks. "People as pitifully stupid as you are getting rarer and rarer. Forget it. I don't want to waste my breath on you. Before you die, I'll give you a piece of advice. You won't have a chance to use the trump card that you've been keeping. Gather all the 10,000 heaven-slaying dogs here." As he spoke, Ji Tianqing looked around and pointed at the 30,000 soldiers in the sky. He said disdainfully, "These useless soldiers and crab generals are not enough for me to kill. They're far from enough." Everyone was shocked when they heard this. Not only was Marshal Ruyang shocked and angry, but his eyes were also filled with murderous intent. The 30,000 Heaven Punisher soldiers were so angry that their faces turned red. Their blood was flowing in reverse. All of them roared and roared. "What an arrogant bastard! If the heavens want a man to die, they must first make him mad. This bastard has gone mad. Haha, what a joke. Ji Tianqing is so arrogant that he's lost his mind." Ji Tianqing, go ahead and be as arrogant as you like. These are your last words anyway. Marshal, are you still wasting time on that lunatic? Give the order to kill him. It's not enough to just kill Ji Tianqing. We must cut him into pieces and grind his bones to dust. Curses and roars resounded in the sky one after another, especially the 100 or so golden armor captains. All of them looked like they had been injected with chicken blood. Their morale and fighting spirit were high. Marshal Zhuiyang calmed down and stared at Ji Tianqing. He put on a pitiful look and sighed. Ji Tianqing, who is hailed as the strongest opponent of our race, has lost his mind in a hopeless situation. He has become the biggest joke in the world. Since you want to die, Ben Shuai will give you a quick death. Marshal Ruyang waved his hand and ordered, "Everyone, listen up. Activate the Samsara Annihilation Formation and kill Ji Tianqing." The 160 captains of the golden armored ships replied in unison. Then everyone channeled their energy and shot out a red light into the Samsara Annihilation Formation. In an instant, the Samsara Annihilation Formation's power more than doubled and started to operate quickly. More than 90 million purple light blades appeared in the formation. They poured down like a snowstorm and drowned the entire island. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Every purple light blade was comparable to the attack of a first-level true god. The endless light blades flew back and forth and immediately shredded the island into pieces, turning it into sand and dust that fell into the sky. However, Tianqing's battleship was safe and sound. The light blades could not hurt it at all. Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao were in the endless light blades and were also unharmed. You dare to call this crude formation the Samsara Annihilation Formation? You're just a frog at the bottom of a well. Hilarious. Ji Tianqing sneered disdainfully and held the burial of Heaven's sword tightly with both hands. Yin Yao and he had a telepathic connection. They did not need to talk, and she understood what he meant. She immediately took out the Source Stone Divine Sword. Then, the two of them started to use their techniques. They pushed their god power to the limit, and their bodies lit up with divine light that shot into the sky. Sword breaking 9 heavens. In the next moment, Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao shouted at the same time and swung their divine swords toward the south. Suddenly, endless golden divine light gushed out from the two divine swords, forming a 300-mile-long, 9 heavens divine dragon in the sky. Roar, accompanied by a dragon roar that tore heaven and earth and shook the universe. The 300-mile-long divine dragon sword aura slashed the dark purple divine light shield in an invincible manner. At this moment, the sun and moon lost their light and heaven and earth lost their color. The spirit chi of heaven and earth within 100,000 miles was sucked dry. The hearts of more than 30,000 soldiers of the Heaven Punishing Army stopped beating instantly, and they all looked terrified. Chapter 2688. No one could believe it. The 300-mile-long divine dragon sword shadow in the sky was released by Ji Tianqing. It was so powerful that it could swallow the heavens and the earth. The power and aura of that sword had exceeded the knowledge of many members of the Heaven Punisher. Marshal Ruyang knew that even the great emperor of the Heaven Punisher, who was half a step away from becoming a heavenly god, might not be able to unleash such a terrifying attack. Thus, his heart felt as if it had fallen into an ice cellar, and his entire body was cold. Kaboom! In the next moment, a loud explosion that shook the universe erupted and resounded through the clouds. Marshal Ruyang had spent countless resources to set up the 1,000-mile-wide array, but had been shattered by the divine dragon sword shadow. A huge crack tore the formation into two halves, and purple light fragments splattered out in all directions. A destructive storm followed the divine dragon sword shadow and swept toward the battleships and members of the Heaven Punisher. Marshal Ruyang reacted the fastest. He immediately teleported away when he realized that a disaster was about to befall him. However, the battleships and members of the Heaven Punisher were instantly destroyed. Boom, boom, boom. The divine dragon sword shadow's power did not decrease as it slashed into the crowd. At least 5,000 members of the Heaven Punisher and more than 30 battleships were hit by the divine dragon sword shadow. These people and battleships did not have the chance to dodge or fight back. They were instantly blasted into pieces. The sky that had been filled with people was immediately cleared out. Immediately after, a devastating storm swept over. The storm passed through the empty space and affected more than 4,000 members of the Heaven Punisher and more than 20 battleships. Swoosh! The members of the Heaven Punisher were shattered in the storm, and the battleships also collapsed. Billions of pieces and debris were blown thousands of miles away by the storm and scattered in the vast ocean. After a long while, the earth-shattering storm finally dissipated. The island regained its peace. The divine array within a 1,000-mile-wide radius gradually collapsed. The huge pirate fleet also disappeared. The place where it had been turned into a blue sea with huge waves. A huge gap appeared in the encirclement in the sky. The southern region was empty. Only the battleships and members of the Heaven Punisher from the east, west, and north were left. There were only 100 battleships left, and the number of members of the Heaven Punisher decreased by 10,000. There were only 20,000 of them left. An invisible and terrifying aura enveloped the sea. The hearts and souls of the survivors were filled with shock and fear. The soldiers of the heavenly expedition, who had been full of fighting spirit and killing intent, were all listless like eggplants that had been hit by frost. Shua! Golden and blue lights flashed. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao stepped out and stood proudly in the sky. Behind them, the 2,000 zhang long Tianxing battleship floated quietly in the sky. The 100 cannons on the side of the ship were all opened, preparing for an attack that could destroy heaven and earth. The world was silent. Marshal Ruyang, who had fled thousands of miles away, was lucky enough to escape. While the soldiers were not paying attention, he quietly flew back into the crowd and stood still. At this moment, Ji Tianxing's cold voice came from the sky. I've said it before, these chickens and dogs are not enough for me to kill. Jingyang, it's not too late to surrender now. When I swing my sword again, you will die without a burial ground. The cold and emotionless voice was like a heavy hammer that slammed into Marshal Ruyang's heart. He was filled with fear and looked at Ji Tianxing with eyes that were about to pop out of their sockets. At this moment, he finally understood. No wonder Ji Tianxing could destroy the Southern Expedition fleet and kill the Eastern Expedition Marshal and live until today unscathed. No wonder Ji Tianxing dared to step into the Black Sun with only 2 wives. It turned out that he was so powerful. The rumors of the heavenly expedition were not true at all. Ji Tianxing's true strength was far more terrifying than the rumors said. Thinking of this, Marshal Ruyang felt a trace of regret in his heart. If he had known that Ji Tianxing was so powerful, he would not have harbored such extravagant hopes and insisted on staying on the Black Sun. If he had given up on the Black Sun and escaped without fighting, he could have preserved his strength and life. But now, it was too late to say anything. Marshal Ruyang was silent. He was full of hesitation and conflict. However, more than 100 captains and 20,000 soldiers of the heavenly expedition all looked at him. How could he surrender to Ji Tianxing in front of so many people? How could he maintain his position in the heavenly expedition race after suffering such humiliation? In the blink of an eye, Marshal Ruyang made up his mind. He pulled himself together and looked at Ji Tianxing with burning eyes. He shouted, "Ji Tianxing, so what if you're very strong? You don't understand the heavenly expedition race. We cannot be corrupted by wealth, and we cannot submit to power. Even if you can destroy the bodies of our warriors, you will never be able to destroy our unyielding, loyal souls. The heavenly expedition race will never submit." His powerful voice reverberated in the air above the sea. The extinguished fighting spirit of the soldiers was immediately reignited. Countless people's blood boiled, and hope reappeared in their eyes. "We will rather die than submit. Fight to the end. Fight to the death with him. We would rather die standing than live kneeling." Many martial gods and soldiers of the heavenly expedition race waved their weapons and shouted with high fighting spirit. Ji Tianxing didn't say anything. He only raised the sword of burial of heaven expressionlessly and used his ultimate killing move. Sword rain. He put his left hand behind his back and pointed the sword at the sky with his right hand. His voice was as loud as a bell. Suddenly, tens of thousands of stars lit up in the sky. Countless giant swords, thousands of feet long, fell from the sky. Before the swords arrived, an invisible force that suppressed the heavens and shattered everything had already sealed off the area within 1,000 miles. Marshal Ruyang and the 20,000 soldiers were suppressed by the invisible force. Their faces turned pale and their bodies bent. They stubbornly raised their heads and looked at the sky. When they saw the tens of thousands of meteors shooting down, everyone's eyes widened. Fear and despair filled their eyes. Boom, boom, boom. Finally, the tens of thousands of meteor swords fell and drowned the sea within 1,000 miles. The heavens and earth became silver and bright. It was so bright that no one could open their eyes. Most of the soldiers of the heavenly expedition race closed their eyes forever under the attack of the giant swords. Along with the deafening explosion, countless whirlpools appeared in the ocean, and waves splashed out. Groups of soldiers of the heavenly expedition race were killed by the giant swords. Pieces of flesh and blood were thrown into the air. Crimson and purple blood fell into the sea and dyed the blue sea dark red. Battleships after battleships were cut in half by the giant swords and fell into the sea. But this was only the beginning of the disaster. Yin Yao also swung the Dawnstone Divine Sword and shot out Starlight Sword auras. Swish! Swish! The sword auras were like shuttles, crescent moons, waterfalls, and rivers. They flew across the heavens and earth. Anyone who was struck by the sword light was instantly crushed to pieces and killed on the spot. Ji couldn't stay idle either. He controlled the Tianxing battleship to unleash the strongest power and kept shooting out golden light beams. The golden light beams were as dense as a rainstorm and bombarded the sea repeatedly. Facing such a terrifying attack, the soldiers of the heavenly expedition race were terrified and had no chance to fight back. Even Marshal Qingyang was forced to flee in a sorry state, dodging all over the place. Chapter 2689. 30,000 soldiers of the heaven-conquering army against Ji Tianxing and his two companions. This was a battle where there was a huge disparity in numbers. It should have been a one-sided battle. In the end, it was indeed a one-sided massacre. However, the targets of the massacre were the soldiers of the heaven-conquering army, who outnumbered the enemy by 10,000. In the midst of the massacre, Marshal Ruyang led many captains and launched a desperate counterattack. However, the results were minimal. They could not hurt Ji Tianxing and his two companions at all. The massacre lasted for a full 45 minutes before it gradually stopped. It was not because Ji Tianxing and his two companions had exhausted their divine power and were unable to continue. It was because almost all 30,000 soldiers of the heaven-conquering army had been killed. Corpses were everywhere in the chaotic 1,000-mile sea. The surface of the sea was dyed dark red. All the warships had been destroyed, including Marshal Ruyang's ship. An extremely small number of survivors gathered around Marshal Ruyang, their hearts filled with despair and despair. They saw Marshal Ruyang standing in the middle. Beside him were 6 captains covered in blood. Behind him were more than 60 soldiers of the heaven-conquering army who were wearing black armor and missing limbs. Only so few of the 30,000 soldiers of the heaven-conquering army were left. They were all seriously injured and were at the end of their rope. Everyone was in complete despair. They gave up resisting and running away. On the other hand, Ji Tianxing and his two companions were safe and sound. They stood calmly in the sky. Ji Tianxing looked at Marshal Ruyang and his companions expressionlessly. He slowly raised his left hand. Destructive divine power was accumulating in his body. In the next moment, he only needed to punch out, and Marshal Ruyang and his companions would be reduced to ashes. At this moment of life and death, the hearts of the soldiers of the heaven-conquering army were in their throats. Their eyes were filled with despair. Marshal Ruyang hesitated for a moment. He took 2 steps forward and shouted anxiously, "Wait!" Ji Tianxing's left hand was clenched into a fist. It stopped in midair, and he looked at him expressionlessly. "Marshal Ruyang, what else do you have to say?" Marshal Ruyang made up his mind and bowed without hesitation. "Ji Tianxing, Ben Shuai was blind and should not have ambushed you here. Ben Shuai admits defeat. I surrender to you now. You're a peerless expert, and we're just weak ants that can't threaten you at all. Why do you have to kill us all?" The dozens of soldiers behind him also knelt in the sky and kowtowed in unison, begging for mercy. "We are willing to surrender. Please spare our lowly lives. Let us live." Seeing this scene, Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows, and the corners of his mouth curled into a playful smile. "Ha ha! Just now, who was the one who passionately said that I don't understand the Heaven Punishers? And who was it that said righteously that the Heaven Punishers were loyal souls who would rather die than submit? Now, it seems like I really don't understand the Heaven Punishers." The thick sense of mockery caused Marshal Qingyang and the others' faces to turn red, and they felt extremely ashamed and angry. However, everyone lowered their heads and did not dare to refute. What was there to refute? Just now, the soldiers had been beating their chests and shouting, as if they were facing death calmly and righteously. Now, they were kneeling and surrendering, without any dignity or backbone. The words they said were like farts. How fragrant! Seeing that no one had anything to say, Ji Tianxing did not waste any more time. His left fist lit up with a dazzling divine light. Marshal Ruyang saw that he was unwilling to forgive them and immediately became worried. He decided to throw caution to the wind and roared at the top of his lungs. "Ji Tianxing, stop. As long as you spare our lives, I'm willing to tell you a huge secret. Really, only a dozen people know this secret. You'll definitely be interested." Ji Tianxing was indeed interested. The divine light in his left hand disappeared. "Oh, what secret?" When Marshal Qingyang saw the opportunity, he quickly explained, "This secret is related to the great emperor of our clan and the gods of the upper realm. However, I can only tell you alone." Ji Tianxing chuckled and said, "All right, if that's the case, I'll spare your life for now. As for the others..." As he spoke, he waved his left hand and shot out dozens of dazzling golden lights. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. Dozens of golden sword lights cut through the sky and instantly pierced the Heaven Punishers beside Marshal Ruyang. Bang, bang, bang. With a series of muffled explosions, the bodies of the 6 captains and more than 60 soldiers of the Heavenly Expedition exploded, their bodies smashed into pieces. In the sky, only Ji Tianxing, the other 2, and Marshal Ruyang were left. Marshal Ruyang trembled as he witnessed the Heaven Punishers being killed in seconds. He was furious. However, his rationality soon overcame his anger. He tried his best to remain calm and looked coldly at Ji Tianxing. He gritted his teeth and said, "Ji Tianxing, you're so vicious." Ji Tianxing sneered disapprovingly. "Ha ha! If you continue to spout nonsense, you'll be the next one to die." Marshal Ruyang's expression froze, and he quickly shut his mouth. Ji Tianxing retracted his left hand and led Yun Yao and Ji Ku across the sky. They flew to Marshal Ruyang and stood still. "Now, you should tell us the secret." Marshal Ruyang looked at Yun Yao and Ji Ku. He hesitated for a moment before saying in a low voice, This is the top secret of my clan. Only the Emperor, Empress, Prince, Left and Right Protectors, Imperial Tutor, and the 5 Marshals know about it. Nobody else knows about it. I didn't know about it before. After Marshal Jindong died and I took over his position, I found out about this secret. Ji Tianxing and the other 2 did not reply. They listened attentively. Marshal Riyong said with a serious expression, "On the surface, the upper realms deities value our clan. They used God's grace, divine light, and other means to help our clan develop and strengthen. However, in reality, our clan is just a pawn in the hands of the upper realms deities. We're lackeys that they've carefully cultivated. Our clan conquering the stars, invading the major galaxies, and dominating the Trichiliocosm were all ordered by the upper realms deities." Ji Tianxing frowned and asked, "Why would the upper realms deities do this? The Trichiliocosm is a mortal world, after all. The deities don't care about it at all." "I don't know the specific reason either." Marshal Riyong shook his head and said in a low voice, "I only know that this is the plan of the upper realms deities. It seems to be related to an ancient legend." "What ancient legend?" Yin Yao asked with a serious expression. Marshal Riyong shook his head blankly, indicating that he did not know. Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "Go on." Marshal Riyong continued, "Other than ordering our clan to dominate the Trichiliocosm, the upper realms deities also gave an oracle to the Great Emperor. After that, the Great Emperor gave a secret order to all the marshals to search for a divine map in each of the major galaxies. This mission is very confidential and has always been carried out in secret." "Divine map?" Ji Tianxing narrowed his eyes. A glint flashed in his eyes, and he asked in a low voice, "What divine map? Formation map? Divine weapon map? Or treasure map?" Marshal Riyong smiled bitterly and said, "I don't know either. Even the Great Emperor can't clearly describe what the divine map looks like or what its characteristics are. We only know that any divine map that is beyond the level of a true god must be collected and handed over to the Great Emperor for inspection." Chapter 2690. Ji Tianxing was very interested in the divine map. Many thoughts flashed through his mind. His heart was filled with questions, and he wanted to find out the truth. Unfortunately, Marshal Riyong knew very little about this. Even the Great Emperor of Heaven Punisher did not know what the divine map was that the upper realm deities wanted. Ji Tianxing was somewhat unwilling to give up. He tried to interrogate Marshal Huiyang in a roundabout way, but failed to get any useful information. After revealing these secrets, Marshal Ruyang was like a deflated balloon. He was dispirited. "Ji Tianxing, I've told you all the information and secrets I know. You should also fulfill your promise and let me live." Marshal Ruyang looked up at Ji Tianxing and said expressionlessly. However, before he could finish, Ji Tianxing interrupted him. "The top secret you mentioned is not only vague and ambiguous, but it's also hard to tell if it's true or false. I'll have to verify that you're telling the truth before I consider sparing your life." Marshal Riyong frowned and asked cautiously, "How do I verify it?" "Search your soul, of course," Ji Tianxing said as he extended his right palm and released a mysterious black light that enveloped Marshal Riyong. "No!" Marshal Riyong turned pale with fright. He roared with grief and anger. "Ji Tianxing, you untrustworthy bastard! You're despicable and shameless." As he cursed, he unleashed all his strength and tried to teleport away. However, his injuries were too severe. How could he escape from Ji Tianxing's grasp? In the next moment, he was enveloped by the mysterious black light. An incomparably strong divine soul power invaded his body and tightly wrapped around his divine soul. Marshal Riyong's soul suffered a heavy blow. His consciousness blurred and he fainted. After that, Ji Tianxing forcibly seized his soul's memories, causing his soul to be injured, and he remained unconscious. After 100 breaths of time, Ji Tianxing finished refining Marshal Ruyang's memories and ended the spellcasting. He slowly withdrew the mysterious black light and slapped the unconscious Marshal Ruyang with his palm, killing him instantly. When facing the Heaven Punishers, there was no need to talk about morality or trust. Moreover, He had never promised Marshal Ruyang that he would let Marshal Ruyang live. When Yun Yao and Ji Ku saw that he had killed Marshal Ruyang, they both asked about the situation. Tianxing, is Marshal Ruyang's secret true or false? Big brother Tianxing, have you already gotten the answer? Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and answered, I've already refined Marshal Ruyang's memories, so I have a better understanding of the Heaven Punisher race. He wasn't lying. Everything he said was true. The Heaven Punishers were indeed the lackeys of the deities of the upper realm. They were ordered by the deities of the upper realm to invade all the major star zones in an attempt to dominate the 3,000 worlds. During this process, they were secretly searching for the whereabouts of the divine map. They collected many treasures that seemed to be the divine map and handed them to the Heaven Punisher for inspection. Yun Yao frowned and thought for a while, then asked, the deities of the upper realm ordered the Heaven Punishers to invade the 3,000 worlds because of an ancient legend. What legend is it? Ji Tianxing was silent for a moment, then said calmly, maybe it has something to do with the Five Elements world? After all, the Five Elements world is the most special star among the 3,000 worlds. It once coexisted with the heavenly realm and the dragon realm. It's an eternal main world. Ji Ku came to a sudden realization and quickly nodded. That's right. Big brother Tianxing's analysis is right. It's very possible. Yin Yao nodded slightly. It's indeed possible. Many years ago, the Heaven Punishers knew about the existence of the Dawn Stones and reported this to the deities of the upper realm. The deities of the upper realm were also very interested in the Dawn Stones and ordered the Heaven Punishers to do their best to steal them. If the deities of the upper realm let the Heaven Punishers dominate the 3,000 worlds in order to find the Five Elements world, then everything that happened before makes sense. Ji Tianxing and Ji Ku nodded in agreement. After a moment of silence, Ji Ku asked again, Big brother Tianxing, you've refined Marshal Ruyang's memories. Do you know what the divine map that the deities of the upper realm are looking for is? Ji Tianxing shook his head and explained, Marshal Ruyang's position is lower, so he only knows a little. He doesn't know the details. The person who knows the most about this should be the Heaven Punisher. However, there's something you need to take note of. The deities of the upper realm can interfere with the heavenly Tao's rules and help the Heaven Punishers avoid the 9 heavenly tribulations. This means that the deities are at least at the peak of the God King stage. The divine map that they want is definitely a treasure above the God King stage. Coincidentally, I have a formation that surpasses the God King stage and is infinitely mysterious. Ji Tianxing was talking about the Heaven Punisher formation hidden under the chaotic fog in Kenshin's tomb. 1,000 years ago, Kenshin had obtained the Heaven Punisher formation after a near-death experience in some ancient ruins. This item was known as the ultimate mystery of the God realm and contained the secret of immortality. Therefore, countless God Kings went crazy for it and tried to steal it at all costs. Kenshin's death was definitely related to the Heaven Punisher formation. Ji Ku had participated in the Great War of the Gods and knew the reason why Kenshin was surrounded by so many God Kings. When she heard Ji Tianxing's words, she trembled and immediately understood what Ji Tianxing meant. Big brother Tianxing, you mean the Heaven Punisher formation? It's very possible. Ji Tianxing nodded. Ji Ku's eyes widened and she said in disbelief, We've already died 1,000 years ago and the Heaven Punisher formation disappeared with us. Those bastards from the God realm are still thinking about the Heaven Punisher formation and won't give up until they find it? Ji Ku paused for a moment. She thought of something even more terrifying and said with a complicated expression, if the God realm deities from the upper realm are asking the Heaven Punisher tribe to find the Heaven Punisher formation, then that means the deities behind the Heaven Punisher tribe are the God Kings from back then. There are mortal enemies. Yin Yao's expression also changed, and she said in a serious tone, I'm afraid that the current God realm is no longer the same. The ones in power are most likely the God Kings. Even though Tianxing has died 1,000 years ago, they haven't given up on searching for the Heaven Punisher formation. It looks like even if we ascend to the God realm, we might not be safe. We'll definitely face greater danger. After the three of them analyzed the situation, the truth gradually surfaced. Ji Tianxing smiled and said in a playful tone, "Fate is indeed a dead knot that can't be untied. Even though I've died 1,000 years ago and reincarnated, I still can't escape fate. In the end, I have to fight to the death with those bastards and settle my grudges. The Heaven Punisher tribe, the 5 elemental world, and the Heaven Punisher formation are the things that led me to the path of revenge. Whether we know it or not, whether we're willing or not, we can't escape fate's arrangement." Yin Yao also nodded and said, "In the mortal world, we have to fight to the death with the Heaven Punisher tribe. Even if we ascend to the God realm, we have to solve the mystery and take revenge on those God Kings." Jika looked at the sky with a burning gaze and said in a determined tone, "In this life, we definitely won't lose." Chapter 2691. After a while, Ji Tianxing and the other two left the ocean and headed for the Divine Palace. Marshal Ruyang, 160 captains, and 30,000 soldiers of the Divine Palace had been killed. However, there were still more than 100 captains and 10,000 soldiers of the Divine Palace. If they didn't get rid of these people, the Black Sun would still be under the rule of the Divine Palace. Half a day later, Ji Tianxing and the other two flew to the depths of the ocean and stopped in the clouds. Even though they were surrounded by white clouds in all directions and looked hazy and illusory under the golden sunlight, they were still in a daze. However, Ji Tianxing had refined Marshal Ruyang's memories. He knew that there was a dazzling heaven-punishing divine palace in the sea of clouds 5 kilometers ahead. He also knew all the secrets of the divine palace, including the layout of the divine palace, the defensive arrays, the strength of the guards, and the amount of resources stored in it. Ji Tianxing stood in the clouds and used the divine eye secret technique to look at the sky in front of him. There was a great maze formation in the sea of clouds that covered a radius of 100 kilometers, protecting the heaven-punishing divine palace and concealing it. Ji Tianxing quickly saw through the great maze formation and used the method to break it, breaking the divine formation. Swish! As a bright purple light flashed, the maze array collapsed. A sacred golden divine palace that was 200 miles wide appeared in front of the three of them. Ji Tianxing used a small trick to break 2 defensive divine arrays. Then, he took Yin Yao and Ji Ku into the divine palace. Inside the temple, countless divine formations have been set up, as well as an inescapable ambush. The hundreds of captains guarding the temple and the tens of thousands of soldiers of the heaven-conquering army had already received the warning. When Ji Tianxing and the other two entered the range of the divine palace, they attacked without hesitation. Dozens of true god-level arrays were activated, releasing light pillars and light blades that blotted out the sky and covered the earth, raining down on Ji Tianxing and the other two. More than 50 warships and hundreds of golden-armored captains surrounded Ji Tianxing and the other two, launching a fierce siege. The tens of thousands of soldiers of the Heaven Crusade also formed a huge encirclement. They formed a battle formation and joined forces to unleash attacks that could destroy heaven and earth, drowning Ji Tianxing and the other two like a flood. A battle that shook the heavens and the earth with a shocking momentum had just begun. Ji Tianxing and his wife each displayed their strengths. They all erupted with their strongest strength and used their most powerful divine arts. Endless sword flashes, spear flashes, and divine arts flashed through the sky, shattering the attacks of the Heaven Punishers. Rumble, loud sounds reverberated in the sky. Violent divine power shockwaves spread out like ripples, covering a radius of 1,000 miles. As time passed, the soldiers of the heaven-conquering army continued to suffer casualties, and their numbers decreased rapidly. The majestic and dignified heaven-punishing divine palace had also been destroyed by the shockwaves of the battle. It had been reduced to ruins, and broken walls could be seen everywhere. This battle lasted for a full 15 minutes before it stopped. The result was self-evident. Hundreds of heaven-conquering warships had been destroyed, and they had been reduced to rubble and scrap metal. Nearly 100 golden-armored captains had been killed, and none of them had a complete corpse. Tens of thousands of heaven-conquering army soldiers had also been killed, and they had all been reduced to ashes. Originally, there had been a few hundred guards and servants in the heaven-punishing divine palace. In this earth-shattering battle, they had also suffered and were killed one after another. After the battle ended, the heavens and the earth were dead silent. The heaven-punishing divine palace had been reduced to ruins. Only broken walls and rubble were left, and smoke was still rising from them. The heaven-conquering army soldiers guarding the divine palace had all died. Corpses and purple bloodstains could be seen in the ruins. However, Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, and Ji Ke were still standing in the sky, safe and sound. Other than using a large amount of divine power, they had not suffered any substantial injuries. After resting for a while, the three of them began to search for the treasury in the ruins. Marshal Ruyang had specially reinforced the treasury in the divine palace, and he had even set up a powerful defensive divine array. Therefore, the entire divine palace had been reduced to ruins, but the treasury had been preserved. Ji Tianxing had Marshal Ruyang's memories, so he easily found the treasury's location. An hour later, the three of them had emptied the treasury of all the divine items and resources. Those divine items and resources had been plundered by the heaven-conquering army from the entire Green Sun galaxy. There were so many of them that it was difficult to count, and their value was also immeasurable. Ji Tianxing, Yin Yao, and Ji Ke's spatial rings were all full, but they had only taken 1/3 of it. Ji Tianxing had put the remaining 2/3 of the treasures and resources into the sword world of the burial of heaven. After all, the sword world was a special small world. After so many years of expansion, the sword world had already reached a radius of 100 million miles, and it could accommodate billions of living beings. The three of them returned with a full load, and they left the Green Sun galaxy on the Tianxing warship. There were still dozens of captains and 6,000 heaven-conquering army soldiers left on the 4 continents of the Green Sun galaxy. However, those people had scattered, and Ji Tianxing was too lazy to waste time killing them one by one. He had already done a great favor by killing Marshal Ruyang and the main force of the heaven-conquering army. The fate of the Green Sun galaxy had nothing to do with him. Swoosh! The Tianxing warship passed through the azure light shield, left the Green Sun galaxy, and returned to the dark void. On the way back to the 5 Elements world, Ji Tianxing had also come up with a plan. Only 20% of the treasures and resources we plundered from the heaven-conquering palace are divine level. We will keep them for our own use. The remaining 80% of the normal resources and treasures will be placed in the 5 Elements world. This way, the 5 Elements world's resources will be more abundant, and its power will be stronger. Yao, Kuka, what do you think? There were many ways to restore the power of the 5 Elements world and make it stronger. Devouring and refining planets was only one of them. Investing large amounts of resources and treasures in the 5 Elements world was another way. Yin Yao and Ji Ke did not have any objections, and they both nodded in agreement. Ji Ke smiled and said, "Big Brother Tianxing, you are now the master of the 5 Elements world, and you are one with it. You will live and die together." Strengthening the 5 Elements world is also a way to increase your strength. Why would we object? Yin Yao thought for a moment and then advised Ji Tianxing. Tianxing, how do you plan to distribute the 80% of cultivation resources? If possible, you should invest more treasures and resources in the Tianxian continent. After all, our parents and friends are still cultivating in the Tianxian continent. Ji Tianxing smiled approvingly and nodded. I have the same idea. Of the 5 continents in the 5 Elements world, only the Xinwu continent has the most abundant resources and the strongest martial artists. The other 4 continents are very barren, and their cultivation resources are limited. The achievements of their martial artists are also very limited. If we want the 5 Elements world to quickly strengthen, we need to support the other 4 continents and provide them with abundant cultivation resources and techniques. I plan to start from the Tianxian continent. Chapter 2692. Ever since Ji Tianxing and the other 2 left the Tianxian continent, they had never returned. However, Ji Tianxing had gained control of the five elemental world, so he could understand the situation of the entire world. As long as he used his divine will, he would know everything that happened on the five continents like the back of his hand. Even if he did not enter the Tianxian continent, he could clearly see the situation there. Zhongzhou was becoming more and more prosperous. Various races were multiplying, and martial arts were flourishing. Everything was developing in a good direction. His father and Yunyao's parents were both in high positions. They had been cultivating peacefully, and their strength was increasing day by day. The monarch's residence was still at the peak of martial arts. They had nurtured a large number of outstanding princes and maintained the world's peace. The imperial court of Zhongzhou was a deterrent. They ruled the entire Tianxian continent and protected hundreds of millions of people. The imperial court of the demon race worked hard and educated hundreds of millions of people to become stronger. Everything was so familiar. Originally, Yinyao had planned to return to the Tianxian continent to visit her parents and relatives when she was free. However, Ji Tianxing persuaded her to give up on this idea. After Tianxing's battleship flew back to the five elemental world, Ji Tianxing used a secret technique to show the situation of the Tianxian continent to Yunyao and Ji Ku. On the huge light screen, vast mountains, rivers, and bustling cities and tribes appeared. The scenes of Cloud's spirit palace and the demon race's imperial court were also clearly displayed. Yunyao and Ji Ku saw their parents and relatives, as well as familiar homes and friends. They were deeply happy. After a full hour, Ji Tianxing finished casting the spell and removed the white light screen. He looked at Yunyao and Ji Ku and said earnestly, "Family is important, but what we need to do is not to reminisce about the past and waste time. We shoulder the sacred mission of protecting the five elemental world and bear unimaginable dangers and hardships. What we need to do is silently protect the five elemental world and protect them. Also, we need to resolve more and more dangers and difficulties and kill more powerful enemies. When our family and friends leave the Tianxian continent and step onto the Shenwu continent, I will make the appropriate arrangements for them." Yin Yao and Ji Ku nodded to show that they understood. "Tianxing, we've already left the profound sky continent and been separated from our parents for more than 60 years. It's inevitable that we miss and worry about them. Now that my wish has been fulfilled, I know what to do. I won't waste any more time. Big brother Tianxing, thank you for helping me fulfill my wish. I'm relieved to see my parents and big brother grow up safely." Ji Tianxing thought for a moment and continued, "Actually, I miss my father, just like you. I really want to visit him, but I know that now is not the time. We'll wait until we've dealt with our enemies, eliminated the crisis, and achieved true peace. Only then will we reunite with them." Yin Yao and Ji Ku both expressed their understanding and looked forward to that day coming as soon as possible. After that, the two of them entered the Nine Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda to recuperate. Ji Tianxing took out 80% of the cultivation resources and used the power of the world to transport them to the Tianxian land. Not long after, on the peaceful Tianxian land, there was a heavy rain of spiritual energy. Boundless five-colored spiritual qi converged into a torrential downpour, sprinkling over the entire continent. All living things were nurtured and grew healthily. Martial artists were nourished by the spiritual energy and increased their strength and broke through to the next realm. At the same time, there were also billions of treasures and cultivation resources scattered randomly across the land. After the news spread, it attracted countless martial artists to search for them with all their might. The martial artists who successfully found the treasures and resources received great fortuitous opportunities, and their strength increased by leaps and bounds. In the next few years, countless martial arts geniuses and elite warriors would emerge in the Tianxian land. They would enter an even more magnificent era of martial arts. Of course, the Central State Imperial Court, the Demon Imperial Court, the Eastern Sea Imperial Court, the Cloud Spirit Palace, the Imperial King Mansion, and the Tianxian region were the places that Ji Tianxing focused on. countless heavenly materials and earthly treasures and cultivation resources had landed in these areas. Without a doubt, Ji Tianxing, Yin Yao, and Ji Ke's parents and friends would receive great fortuitous opportunities. After finishing this matter, Ji Tianxing withdrew his divine power with satisfaction. He controlled the 5-elemental world and continued to travel in the void. In the next 16 years, the 5-elemental world continued to travel in the Azure Sun region. Along the way, Ji Tianxing and the others saved more than 50 worlds and destroyed more than 1,400 heaven-conquering battleships. They killed more than 200,000 heaven-conquering soldiers. During this time, the news of the Azure Sun being rescued and the Eastern Marshal and Marshal Ruyang being killed spread in the Azure Sun region. 200,000 of the survivors of the Eastern Expedition Fleet were also killed by Ji Tianxing and the others. As a result, the Eastern Expedition Fleet only existed in name and had fallen apart. The tens of thousands of surviving soldiers were divided into thousands of teams and fled the Azure Sun region in a hurry. They did not dare to stay and cause trouble. 16 years later, when the 5-elemental world left the Azure Sun region, the entire star region was rescued. More than 200 worlds regained their freedom. Although there were still a few heaven-conquering soldiers left in the star region, they could not cause any trouble. They were destined to be killed by the other races. The 17th year arrived. The 5-elemental world entered the Black Dragon Star region and began a new journey. The Black Dragon Star region was relatively close to the heaven-conquering star region. There was only the Fonggang Star region in between. More than 100 years ago, the Northern Expedition Fleet of the heaven-conquering race had occupied the Black Dragon Star region. When Ji Tianxing and the others entered the Black Dragon Star region and rescued the various worlds, they discovered some serious problems. The heaven-conquering race had been operating in the Black Dragon Star region for more than 100 years. They were deeply rooted and powerful. Almost every world had a heaven-conquering general, 30 golden armor captains, and more than 3,000 heaven-conquering soldiers. In addition, the heaven-conquering race had enslaved the entire world. They had hundreds of millions of slaves and millions of martial artists as puppets. The puppets controlled by the heaven-conquering race were all martial Dao experts of various races. There were a small number of martial gods of foreign races, some martial saints, and a large number of Tribulation Realm experts. These native puppets were loyal to the heaven-conquering race and helped the heaven-conquering race firmly control the entire world. When Ji Tianxing rescued the various worlds, he had to spend more time and effort. That was because the martial Dao experts of the various worlds had become puppets. They would never resist the heaven-conquering race's rule. Not only did he have to kill the heaven-conquering race, but he also had to deal with a large number of puppets. Fortunately, the people and divine beasts around him were all true immortal realm experts. In the face of absolute power, the heaven-conquering race and puppets of the various worlds could only be crushed. 5 years passed in the blink of an eye. They had rescued more than 20 worlds, killed 80,000 heaven-conquering soldiers, and nearly 20 million heaven-conquering puppets. At this moment, the 5-elemental world stopped in the void. Ji Tianxing steered the battleship and took Yun Yao, Ji Ke, and the White Dragon to a world tens of millions of miles away. Suddenly, a dazzling white light appeared in the void in front of them. It surged toward Tianxing's battleship like a flood. Chapter 2693. The Tianxing battleship was speeding through the void as fast as a ray of light. Ji Tianxing and the rest were on high alert when they saw the overwhelming white light in front of them. The four of them knew that there were all kinds of dangers hidden in the cold and silent void. The most common ones were void storms, folded spaces, extraterrestrial flames, and meteorites. Under normal circumstances, void storms were black in color. The dazzling white light in front of them was not void storms, extraterrestrial flames, or meteorites. Of course, it was not folded spaces either. After all, folded spaces could not move. They could only hide in the void. That's a divine skill attack. Someone is attacking us. The same thought flashed through Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, Jiku, and by Long's minds at the same time. Although the white divine light was still 100,000 miles away from the battleship. To be safe, Ji Tianqing still controlled the Tianqing battleship to fly to the left to avoid the attack of the white divine light. However, the white divine light also changed direction and swept toward the Tianqing battleship. Ji Tianqing frowned when he saw this. His eyes were cold as he murmured, "They're really coming for us." At the same time, when the white divine light got closer, he found out that the white divine light was actually spatial energy. The pure and powerful spatial energy was like a river that was 10,000 miles long and was about to swallow the Tianqing battleship. Once the Tianqing battleship was swept by the white light, it would be strangled and cut by the spatial energy. Although the Tianqing battleship's quality had reached the heavenly god level and it was unlikely to be torn into pieces. However, the mysterious spatial energy could send the battleship to an unknown area. It's actually spatial energy? Only heavenly god-level elites can master the spatial law. Who is the other party? How can they be so powerful? Or maybe they're using some kind of powerful divine weapon. While Ji Tianqing was puzzled, he used the spatial law without hesitation and released hundreds of giant white light blades. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Hundreds of 10-mile-long white light blades instantly cut through the void and slashed at the long river of white light tens of thousands of miles away. With a series of muffled booms, the long river of white light was instantly shattered into pieces, splashing out billions of white light fragments. An earth-shattering shockwave containing countless fragments of white light blossomed in the void, spreading for tens of thousands of miles. The dark void was suddenly illuminated as bright as day, dazzling and dazzling. The fragments of white light transformed into powerful spatial energy, creating billions of spatial vortexes in the void. It was exceptionally beautiful. The Tianqing battleship was temporarily safe. Ji Tianqing and the other two did not let down their guard. They released their divine senses to search the surrounding void. Not long after, a huge black shadow appeared in the void in front of them. It was approaching them without making a sound. In just a few breaths of time, the long and narrow shadow arrived and stopped 100 miles away. Ji Tianqing took a closer look and realized that the black shadow was a black battleship that was 3,000 feet long. The long and narrow battleship was like a black dragon baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. Its appearance was ferocious and domineering. There was a huge dragon head at the front of the battleship. Its bloody mouth was wide open, brewing purple divine light. Purple light flashed on both sides of the battleship, forming two huge wings of light that enabled the battleship to fly as fast as lightning. It really is the Heaven Punisher tribe. Ji Tianqing's eyes flashed with cold light as he sneered. Yin Yao observed for a moment and said in a low voice, "The quality and specifications of that battleship are comparable to the Heaven Punisher's battleship. However, the Heaven Punisher's battleship has already been destroyed." Jiku added, "In other words, the owner of this Heaven Punisher battleship is as powerful as the Heaven Punisher. It might even be the Heaven Punisher's battleship." Bai Long sneered with a mocking expression. "If the Heaven Punisher is really here to kill us, then that would be great. However, he has already suffered at the hands of Master. Why would he come here to deliver his head on a silver platter?" Yin Yao frowned and thought for a moment. If it's not the Heaven Punisher, then who could it be? The Empress, Yin Shuiyin? Or the Crown Prince, Tian Shu? Ji Tianqing looked at the Heaven Punisher battleship 100 miles away and said with a smile, "The owner has already shown himself. We'll know when we see." As soon as he finished speaking, the Heaven Punisher battleship, which looked like a black dragon, opened its huge and heavy hatch. Crack, 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 crack. As the cabin door opened, a figure that was as black as ink walked out of the warship. It was over 30 meters tall. This burly figure looked somewhat similar to a human. He had 4 thick limbs and a strong body. A large head rested on his broad shoulders. Moreover, there were 99 dark blue lines on his black body that intersected with each other like meridians. 9 divine swords of different colors floated behind his back. They shone with colorful divine light. Following the appearance of this giant, an invisible pressure spread out in the void. Ji Tianxing looked at the giant for a moment and came to a conclusion. This man has the strength of a LV9 true immortal. He was the one who released the spatial white light. He should be the son of the Heaven Punisher, Great Emperor, Tian Shu. It's really him, the guy called the Astral War God? Yin Yao raised her eyebrows. Ji Ko asked in confusion. That's strange. Isn't he the son of the Heaven Punisher, Great Emperor? Why does he look like a giant? He doesn't look like a member of the Heaven Punisher race at all. Bai Long smiled evilly and said playfully, he must be Yin Shuyan's son. However, I'm not sure if he's really the Heaven Punisher Great Emperor's son. Jika looked confused and asked in confusion, Xiao Bai, what do you mean? Ha 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 ha. White Dragon laughed evilly, but he didn't explain. Ji Tianxing glanced at him and Ji Ku, then said with an indifferent expression, Cuckoo, don't bother with little White. This kid's mouth is very poisonous. Oh, Ji Ku did not give up and asked, Big Brother Tianxing, why doesn't Tian Shu look like a member of the Heaven Punisher race? Ji Tianxing thought for a moment and explained seriously, Yin Shui Yin is a water spirit. If she marries the Heaven Punisher Great Emperor, their child might not be a member of the Heaven Punisher race. Tian Shu's bloodline will mutate, and he is highly regarded by the God Spirit. He has received enlightenment and guidance. Perhaps he cultivated some special divine ability that changed his outer appearance. At that moment, Tian Shu walked to the front of the ship and stood on the huge black dragon head. Two tall Heaven Punishers in purple and green robes walked out of the cabin and stood behind Tian Shu. Tian Shu looked coldly at Tianxing's battleship and sneered, Ji Tianxing, although we have never met, I have heard of your name. When I heard that you were going to planet Heaven Punisher, I hurried here to wait for you. What? I, the God of War, am here to welcome you. Do you not even have the courage to show yourself? Chapter 2694. Ever since Ji Tianxing took control of the Five Elements world to travel in the void and save various worlds. More than 30 years had passed since then. During this time, he had destroyed the southern and eastern fleets and saved the Purple Cloud and Green Sunstar Zone. News of his deeds had long been sent back to the Heaven Punishers. Therefore, it was reasonable for Tian Shu to come to the Black Dragon Star Zone to kill him. He was not surprised at all. However, the two Heaven Punishers behind Tian Shu caught his attention. One of them wore a purple robe, while the other wore a green robe. Both of them looked old and had white hair. Both of them had the same cultivation realm, which was 7th level True God realm. Ji Tianxing frowned as he pondered. LV7 True Immortal Realm? They're even more powerful than the Imperial Tutor and the Marshals. Looks like those two old guys are the left and right protectors. At this moment, Tian Shu was getting impatient. He sneered disdainfully. Ji Tianxing, are you going to hide in your battleship forever? I heard that you're arrogant and insufferably arrogant. I didn't expect you to be so timid and cowardly when I, the God of War, am here. Since you don't dare to show yourself, I'll destroy your turtle shell and drag you out. As soon as he finished speaking, Tian Shu waved his hand and gave the order to attack. The battleship under his feet immediately opened the main cannon at the bow and launched a fatal attack. Boom! With a loud explosion, the Black Dragon's bloody mouth spat out a 10,000 zhonglong purple beam of light. The beam of light was like a dragon. It carried a terrifying power that could pierce through everything as it blasted toward Tianxing's battleship. Tian Shu's lips curled into a mocking smile. He was waiting to see Tianxing's battleship being blasted to pieces. After all, his Black Dragon battleship had reached the Heavenly God grade. It was powerful enough to look down on the void and sweep through all 3,000 worlds. However, he frowned the next moment and the sneer on his face froze. Tianxing's battleship also released a dazzling golden divine light that blasted toward the purple beam of light. Kaboom! The two equally terrifying light pillars collided violently in the void, creating an earth-shattering boom. The light pillar collapsed at the same time, turning into millions of purple and golden fragments that scattered in all directions. The void within a radius of a few thousand miles was immediately illuminated by the fragments of divine light, creating a dazzling scene. Violent and devastating shockwaves whipped up a shocking storm in the void. After a long while, the storm gradually dissipated. The two warships remained motionless in the void, facing each other from 100 miles away. On the Black Dragon battleship, Tian Shu was still standing proudly on the dragon's head. His face was expressionless, but his eyes were cold. He had already put away the contempt in his heart as he stared sharply at the Tianqing battleship, muttering to himself, "I actually made an error in judgment. This battleship is actually at the heavenly god grade." Previously, he had heard that there was a boundless divine stone in the Five Elements world where Ji Tianqing was. This object was extremely wondrous, and it was extremely beneficial to deities as well. His master was very interested in it, and he ordered a thorough investigation. Now, it seems that Ji Tianqing's battleship was most likely added with a large number of boundless divine stones to reach the heavenly god grade and possess such power. As his voice trailed off, the purple-robed elder said in a deep voice, "Don't worry, Your Highness. I've already made the necessary arrangements. The 12 divine generals will control the Black Dragon battleship and lock onto Ji Tianqing's battleship. After this battle, we will definitely capture his battleship and bring it back to planet Heaven to study." Tian Shu nodded slightly and did not say much. At the same time, the cabin door of Tianqing's battleship opened, and 3 handsome and peerless figures stepped out. The one in front was dressed in a white robe, handsome and domineering. It was Ji Tianqing. The 2 women behind him, one in a white dress and the other in a fiery red dress, were as beautiful as fairies. The 3 of them walked to the bow of the battleship and stood still. Ji Tianqing looked at Tian Shu from afar and said indifferently, "Tian Shu, how dare you and the left and right protectors come to the Black Dragon Star area to intercept me? Aren't you overconfident? If your father doesn't show up, the 3 of you might as well surrender and admit defeat. Otherwise, when you die in the starry sky and beg for mercy, it will be too late." His voice rolled across the void and reached the Black Dragon battleship. Ji Tianqing's tone was calm and did not sound like he was bluffing. Instead, it contained certainty and strong confidence. The left and right protectors frowned and looked angry. Tian Shu also raised his eyebrows and sneered. Hee, that's more like it. This is the rumored lawless, arrogant Ji Tianqing. Only in this way can I feel a sense of accomplishment when I kill you with my own hands and wring your neck." After saying that, Tian Shu slowly raised his broad palms. Divine power that could destroy heaven and earth was brewing in his body. "Ji Tianqing, I'll give you 3 breaths of time to say your last words." As soon as he finished speaking, a dazzling white light shone between his broad palms. His body emitted an invisible aura that swept across the void for 3,000 miles. After 3 breaths of time, his divine power would reach its peak, and he would unleash his most powerful attack. Ji Tianqing sneered disapprovingly. "Let alone 3 breaths of time. Even if I give you 6 hours, you won't be able to change the outcome of your defeat. Then you could go to hell." Tian Shu suddenly shouted angrily. He raised his palms and slapped toward Ji Tianqing. Exquisite, illusory space break. Instantly, 2 overwhelming beams of hazy white light carrying the ever-changing power of space blasted toward Ji Tianqing, Yin Yao, and Ji Ku. Each beam of white light was 10 miles long and 10,000 feet wide. There were millions of vortexes and spatial cracks in them. Once enveloped by the white light, they would be cut by the power of space. Apart from heavenly gods who could withstand it, all living beings below heavenly gods would be shredded into pieces. Only heavenly gods could control the space law. However, Tian Shu was known as the #1 genius in the universe. He had also been enlightened and taught by the upper realm deities, so he had mastered the space law in advance. Therefore, he was full of confidence. However, Ji Tianqing raised his hands without a change in expression. He waved his palms and shot out 36 blazing white light blades. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Each light blade was condensed with space divine power. They were 10,000 feet long and extremely sharp, as if they could cut through everything in the world. In the next moment, the 36 light blades struck the two beams of white light. A cracking sound was heard. The light blades and the white light collapsed at the same time, bursting into millions of pieces. After an earth-shattering storm, millions of vortexes bloomed in the void within 10,000 miles before quickly dissipating. Tianshu's ultimate killer move was easily neutralized by Ji Tianxing just like that. Seeing this, Tianshu's expression became serious. A cold light flashed in his eyes. As expected, those white light blades were released by him. They were not the power of the warship. That damned Ji Tianxing. He has mastered the space divine power too. This thought flashed through his mind. Tianshu stepped into the void and moved 100 miles in a flash. He waved his fist and charged toward Ji Tianxing. Skyfall strike. Tianshu raised his fists high. His entire body emitted a divine light that shot into the sky. He was like a deity descending to the mortal world as he charged toward Ji Tianxing. Chapter 2695. Tianshu took the initiative to attack and arrived in front of Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing didn't move an inch from his original spot. When the purple fists were right in front of him, he raised his fists and punched out. Dragon Elephant Divine Fist. Two phantoms of dragons and elephants as large as mountains instantly blasted the sky pivot, exploding with a loud bang that shook the universe. Boom! The purple fists were shattered on the spot. Tianshu was also sent flying back and crashed into the Black Dragon battleship. The left and right protectors were shocked. They hurried to catch Tianshu and asked about the situation with concern. "Your Highness, are you hurt? Your Highness, are you okay?" Tianshu was shocked and angry. He shouted coldly, "Get out of my way! I have never been defeated in the universe. How can I be defeated by Ji Tianxing?" At the same time, Yin Yao held the divine sword and Ji Ku waved the divine spear. Divine light filled the sky as they attacked the left and right protectors. The left and right protectors could only take out their Kenshin weapons and fight with all their might. Bam, 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 bam. With a muffled explosion, a dazzling five-color divine light exploded in the void. The left and right protectors were sent flying at the same time and landed in the void 300 miles away. Yin Yao and Ji Ku took advantage of the situation and attacked with the divine sword and the divine spear. How can it be so powerful? Damn it. It's one thing for Ji Tianxing to be very strong, but why are these two women not weaker than Ji Tianxing? The left and right guardians were filled with shock. They hurriedly retreated to avoid the attack and joined forces to cast a spell to resist. Boom, boom, boom. The four of them fought fiercely in the void. Divine light covered the sky, and there was a series of loud explosions. The four of them were all true gods. Their figures flashed in the void, and they were as fast as the aurora. In just a few seconds, they had shifted the battlefield and fought their way into the depths of the void. At the same time, Ji Tianxing and Tianshu also left the battleship and flew into the void to begin their battle. There were 12 immortal generals and hundreds of guards on the Black Dragon battleship. Seeing that everyone was engaged in a fierce battle, they carried out the task given by the left custodian. Everyone worked together to control the battleship, ferociously attacking Tianxing's battleship, releasing a dense rain of divine light beams. White Dragon remained calm and controlled the Tianxing battleship in an orderly manner to avoid the bombardment of the divine light. At the same time, he also controlled the battleship to launch a counterattack, releasing dazzling golden light pillars that covered the sky and earth. The two battleships chased each other in the void, flying as fast as the aurora, sometimes launching attacks, sometimes circling to avoid each other's attacks. They were like two pitch-black eagles fighting fiercely in the void, and it was hard to tell who was the winner. Heavenly Divine Fist. Tianshu let out a thunderous roar and threw out over 900 purple fist shadows towards Ji Tianxing. He was sure that Ji Tianxing had also mastered the law of space. and his power was no weaker than his. Therefore, his law of space was useless, so he used the ultimate technique of the Heaven Punisher race. Ji Tianxing didn't panic in the face of danger. He clenched his fingers and pointed at the fist shadows hundreds of times in the sky. Sky-piercing finger. Swish, swish, swish. Instantly, over 900 dazzling golden light beams flashed across the sky and hit the purple fist shadows. Along with a loud rumbling sound, the fist shadows that filled the sky were crushed and quickly dissipated. Tianshu waved his hands again and threw out purple light illusions that covered the sky. They poured towards Ji Tianxing like a torrent of fire. Ji Tianxing's expression was indifferent. He calmly waved his palms, and golden light filled the sky. Boom, boom, boom. The purple divine light and the golden light collided, creating a loud explosion. The two of them collapsed at the same time, creating a shocking storm that spread in the sky. Tianshu's divine skill was neutralized again. His face became colder, and his eyes became more serious. I can't use the law of space, and the divine power of the Heaven Punisher can't work either. Looks like I have to use the battle skill that I'm proud of to fight him in close combat. Only then can I crush him. Tianshu murmured to himself, and his body let out a golden light that shot into the sky. He activated the power of the seven-star brilliant sun divine body and turned into a ball of golden light that was as bright as the sun. His flesh became as hard as metal and was comparable to a supreme-grade, true divine weapon. The divine blood in his body also boiled and let out a violent energy. There was a muffled sound of water flowing. Swish! Tianshu used the phantom steps and teleported 300 miles in the blink of an eye. He rushed in front of Ji Tianxing and slashed with his right leg. His thick and long leg was wrapped in a bright golden light and slashed at Ji Tianxing's head like a blade. Such a simple attack contained the power of a peak true immortal, which was enough to split mountains and rivers. Tianshu knew that most of the entities in the 3,000 worlds were proficient in beautiful divine skills and were very good at long-range combat. However, no one was his match in close combat. He was confident that he would be able to force Ji Tianxing into a flustered state and force to retreat. However, Ji Tianxing's response caused him to frown in surprise. Huh, you're trying to hit a stone with an egg. Ji Tianxing sneered disdainfully. His body lit up with a golden light that soared into the sky. Heavenly dragon body. The next moment, he expanded and became a golden giant 100 feet tall. Tianshu used to be a dozen times taller than him, but now he was 10 times taller. He reached out his left hand like an eagle's claw and locked Tianshu's ankle. His right fist carried the power to crush everything and hit Tianshu's knee. Crack! There was a crisp cracking sound. Tianshu's knee shattered in countless golden fragments and blood splashed out. His entire right leg was bent at a strange angle, and the dazzling golden light immediately disappeared. With a wave of his left hand, Ji Tianxing tossed the heavenly pivot away, sending it tumbling 100 miles away. The excruciating pain made Tianshu frown, and he couldn't help but let out a groan. He was shocked and furious. He yelled in disbelief. He's twice as fast and powerful as me? That's impossible. Ji Tianxing took the opportunity to chase after Lin Yun and punched out with his fists. Tianshu immediately used a divine art to cut off the pain. He raised his fist with all his might and punched at Ji Tianxing. Boom! The four fists collided, and there was an earth-shattering explosion that spread for 10,000 miles. Tianshu, who was small in size, was knocked away. 4 of the knuckles on his huge and sturdy fists had been shattered, and his divine bones were shattered into pieces. Luckily, he couldn't feel the pain in his body anymore, so it didn't affect his battle. Also, he had inherited the special body of the Heaven Punisher and had been baptized by the Divine Spirit. His recovery ability was insane. His shattered knees and knuckles were recovering at a visible speed. You like close-range combat, right? Again. At this moment, Ji Tianxing shouted coldly with an expressionless face. He caught up with Tianshu again and attacked with his fists and legs. Swish, swish, swish. Suddenly, Ji Tianxing's punches and kicks left a series of afterimages in the air and enveloped Tian Shu. Tian Shu was furious and could only block and counterattack with all his might. Bang, bang. Boom, 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 boom. The two of them were entangled and clashed over 100 times in an instant. There was a deafening explosion. Chapter 2696. A full quarter of an hour. Ji Tianxing and Tian Shu had been fighting in close quarters. The two figures were entangled, chasing and flashing in the void, overlapping and separating. During this period, the two of them had swung their fists and legs hundreds of thousands of times, exchanging tens of thousands of blows. The battlefield had shifted close to 10,000 miles. The airwaves produced by the clashes and collisions formed shockwaves that spread in the void, rolling up a destructive storm. Such a fierce and tough battle was unbearable for any true god. Not only did it consume a lot of energy, but it also tested one's consciousness, reaction, judgment, defense, and speed. If it were any other true god, they would have been smashed into pieces and turned into ashes. However, Ji Tianxing and Tian Shu both had rare and special divine bodies that were comparable to supreme-grade true god weapons. Even so, the battle that lasted for a quarter of an hour still ended. The two figures separated and faced each other in the void, separated by 100 miles. Ji Tianxing was safe and sound, standing in the void with a cold expression, his chest rising and falling as he panted slightly. His 1,000-foot divine body was unscathed, but his long hair was messy. Golden light flashed all over his body, and his power was a little chaotic. On the other hand, Tian Shu's outcome was very tragic. His majestic body that was 100 feet tall had long been twisted and deformed. He was hunched over like a lobster, panting violently. His body was full of dents and cracks. Hundreds of joints were shattered, and dark purple blood seeped out. His entire face, in particular, had been beaten beyond recognition. It was a mess of flesh and blood. It had a flat mouth and two large eyeballs, which looked particularly ferocious in the middle of a pile of bloody and rotten flesh. Moreover, Tian Shu had used up too much of his divine power, and his strength had weakened by 40%. Even if he continued to fight, he was no match for Ji Tianxing, and would only be beaten up even more miserably. However, Tian Shu's recovery ability and vitality had reached an extremely abnormal level. Even if he was severely injured, his life was not in danger. Even if he was blasted into pieces, he could use the divine power bestowed by the upper realm deities to be reborn from a drop of blood. He could no longer feel the pain of his physical body. At this moment, he only felt endless humiliation and anger. Goddamn bastard. Tian Shu glared viciously at Ji Tianxing and growled with a hoarse voice. The space laws, the heaven-punishing divine power, the water divine spells, and close combat skills are all useless against him. What kind of monster was he? How could he be so powerful? His true strength is far beyond the 9th level true god realm. He has already surpassed Father and is comparable to a celestial god powerhouse. Even though Dubhe couldn't believe that there was such a terrifying existence in a mortal world, he still couldn't believe it. However, the truth was right in front of him, and he had no choice but to accept this result. When he thought of this, a thought flashed through his mind. He remembered what the heaven-punishing emperor had said many years ago. Tian Shu, I've always been proud of you. Your talent and aptitude are unparalleled, surpassing all the martial artists in the 3,000 worlds. You are the undisputed #1 genius. Even His Excellency, the Divine King, thought highly of you and took you in as his last disciple. He taught you all kinds of divine abilities and supreme skills. Father has no regrets in this life to have such a monstrous son like you. The great Emperor of Heaven Punishing had said the same thing to Tian Shu in a secret room. However, the great Emperor of Heaven Punishing's expression and eyes showed no sign of relief or joy. Instead, they were filled with worry. Tian Shu was puzzled. He asked the great Emperor of Heaven Punishing why he looked so gloomy and pale. The great Emperor of Heaven Punishing did not explain why his son looked so pale. He only said earnestly, "However, the 3,000 worlds are too vast. There are still too many unknown secrets in the world." It was not until I met Ji Tianxing, a young human from a weak world, that I realized that the universe is limitless and that miracles are common. He is the only genius I've seen in my life who could be compared to you. In fact, his talent, aptitude, and means are even better than yours. I hope you won't be arrogant and impatient. If you meet him one day, don't underestimate him. After hearing this, Sky Pivot was full of doubts. He asked several times, wanting to know more about Ji Tianxing's secrets. However, the great Emperor of Heaven Punishing did not say anything. He sent Tian Shu away, locked the secret room, and went into seclusion to cultivate. From then on, Tian Shu remembered the name Ji Tianxing. His natural desire to win and his pride gave birth to a strong fighting spirit and fighting spirit. He started to collect information about Ji Tianxing. He decided to leave the planet of Heaven Punishing and kill Ji Tianxing in person. He needed a glorious and fierce head-on battle. He needed to defeat Ji Tianxing with his own hands and trample him under his feet. Only in this way could he prove that he was the real number one genius in the universe. Therefore, Tian Shu sneaked to the Black Dragon Star Zone while the great Emperor of Heaven Punishing was in seclusion. He made the decision without the great Emperor of Heaven Punishing's consent. He wanted to act alone, but the left and right protectors learned about it. The left and right protectors insisted on following him to carry out the plan and fight against Ji Tianxing together. If Tian Shu did not agree, the left and right protectors would knock on the door, wake up the great Emperor of Heaven Punishing, and report the matter to him. Tian Shu had no choice but to agree. Today, Tian Shu's wish was fulfilled. He successfully arrived at the Black Dragon Star Zone and intercepted Ji Tianxing. They fought fiercely in the universe. The battle went as he wished. It was a fierce head-on battle without any fancy moves or techniques. It was a head-on battle. However, the result of the battle made him both angry and ashamed. His self-esteem was severely damaged. He, who had always been arrogant and invincible, finally tasted defeat. It was terrible. His heart was filled with resentment and anger. Only now did Tian Shu believe the great Emperor of Heaven Punishing's words. At the same time, he could guess why the great Emperor of Heaven Punishing did not look well. He must have been seriously injured, and Ji Tianxing had injured him. Just then, Ji Tianxing stepped across the void and walked over at a moderate pace. Tian Shu, I've heard that the Heaven Punishing clan praised you as the number one genius in the universe. You even call yourself the Astral War God. Today, I'm disappointed to see you. The Heaven Punishing clan is narrow-minded. You are just an arrogant frog at the bottom of the well. Ji Tianxing said expressionlessly with a faint smile on his lips. Space laws, Heaven Punishing divine power, water divine skills, close combat. You've tried everything, but you've failed without exception. What else do you have? Use them all. Otherwise, you won't even have the chance to regret it. Every sentence and every word was like a sharp knife stabbing into Tian Shu's heart. However, these were all facts. He could not refute them. He was filled with grief and indignation. He roared angrily and took out a 30-meter-long ancient halberd. Ji Tianxing, don't be so arrogant. When I take out the Sea God's halberd, I am the real Astral War God. You are destined to be killed by my Sea God's halberd and die in the void. And I am the real number one genius in the universe. Chapter 2697. Tian Shu held the black halberd that was more than 10 feet long and thick. His blood was boiling. The fighting spirit and will to fight that had disappeared previously had returned, filling his chest once again. The Sea God halberd was his natal divine weapon. At the same time, the Empress had spent decades to create this heavenly god-level weapon for him. The Empress was the saintess of the Water Spirit clan and the reincarnation of a divine lord from the upper world. Not only did she have hundreds of divine skills, but she also had countless ways to forge heavenly god-level and monarch gray divine weapons. The Heaven Punishers had collected countless resources and treasures when they conquered the various star zones. This included the fragments and remains of divine weapons from the ancient era. The Empress had used the remains of countless primordial divine weapons to create this halberd and named it the Sea God Halberd. Ever since Tian Shu had obtained this heavenly god-level weapon, he had only used it a few times. After all, he could easily kill 99% of true gods with his bare hands. Only Ji Tianxing could force him to use the Sea God Halberd. Sea God's fury. Tian Shu didn't waste any time. He roared hoarsely and gripped the Neptune halberd with both of his hands, releasing a sky-covering blue divine light. Boundless blue light swept across the void like a shocking wave, and it was about to drown Ji Tianxing. Tian Shu was severely injured and only had 60% of his strength left. However, the Sea God halberd was so powerful that it could threaten Ji Tianxing's life. At this critical moment, Ji Tianxing was still calm and collected. He put his palms together and activated his vast divine power. He used the law of earth and released the endless power of the earth. Heavens break, as he shouted. Endless brown divine light condensed into a 10,000-mile-long mountain range in the void between him and the sky pivot. The mountain range was 3,000 miles wide, 10,000 miles long, and 10,000 feet tall. It was majestic and majestic. Moreover, the mountain range wasn't made of ordinary earth and rocks. It contained incomparably sturdy metals and godly stones, like a huge natural shield wall. Boom! Boom! In the next instant, the azure, blue divine light that blotted out the sky smashed fiercely onto the 5,000 kilometers mountain range, and a muffled bang resounded throughout the world. The blue light that filled the sky was blocked by the mountain range, unable to cross even half a step. Tian Shu's expression changed. He swung the Neptune's halberd again, pushing its power to the limit. Under the amplification of his divine power, the blue light that filled the sky became even more turbulent, its power astonishing. However, the mountain range remained unmoved, firmly blocking the azure divine light's attack. Sky Pivot clenched his teeth and urged his divine power to strengthen the azure divine light. Ji Tianxing calmly extended his palms, using the laws of the earth to maintain the mountain range. Both sides were in a deadlock just like that, competing to see whose divine power was more vigorous, whose strength was more profound. The result was obvious. Ji Tianxing had long reached peak true god. Furthermore, his strength was strengthened more than 9 times. While Dubhe was only peak true god, still very far from half-step celestial deity realm. He was heavily injured again, and his strength was weakened by 40%. His divine power was also greatly depleted. After the deadlock lasted for 100 breaths of time, Dubhe could not hold on any longer. The surging azure divine light receded like a receding tide and quickly dissipated. Ji Tianxing also waved his hand to remove the mountain range. A black light flashed in his right hand, and he wielded the sword of burial of heaven. He crossed 5 miles in a step, his clothes fluttering as he flew toward Tian Shu. He shouted in a deep voice, "Tian Shu, don't be stubborn anymore. Just give up and let me capture you." As he spoke, he formed a sword seal with his left hand and held the sword of burial of heaven with his right hand. He used a supreme sword technique, rising sword of life. As he shouted coldly, the sword of burial of heaven released a dazzling golden light. It swayed in the air, drawing a dazzling sword light that was 100 miles long. Swoosh! This sword's aura was elegant and otherworldly, without the slightest bit of worldly energy. It did not look like a killing move for a decisive battle. It also did not look like a killing move that could destroy heaven and earth. It looked more like a wise man who had experienced the vicissitudes of life and seen through the vanity of the world. He held a brush in his hand and used the starry sky as a painting scroll. It was a freehand landscape painting. It contained the vicissitudes of life, vanity, calmness, tranquility, and loftiness. It was like a god looking down on mortals or an expert looking down on ants. It was quite indifferent. However, it was this seemingly harmless sword strike that caused Tian Shu's eyes to widen in shock, revealing a look of horror. With his strength and experience, he could not see through this sword, nor could he figure out the mystery behind it. He only felt. This sword seemed to have flown from the sky. It was the brush of a god. It was mysterious and magical to the extreme. At this critical moment, Tianshu could only grit his teeth and wave the Neptune halberd with both hands, releasing endless azure divine light. The divine light formed a gigantic ice blue shield, protecting him. In the next instant, the dazzling golden sword light slashed into the ice blue shield. Kaboom! With a deafening shattering sound, the ice blue shield was broken by the sword light on the spot, and a huge crack was formed in the shield. Countless cracks appeared on both sides of the crack, and soon covered the entire shield. Kacha-kacha, sounds of shattering could be heard, and the huge ice blue shield soon fell apart. The 100-mile sword light dimmed a bit, and its power weakened a bit, but continued to slash at Tianshu. Tianshu was shocked. He could only hold the Neptune halberd above his head in desperation. Kaboom! The 100-mile sword light hit the Neptune halberd and let out an earth-shattering sound. The terrifying force of the impact sent Tianshu flying. He was still in the air, but he was already spitting out blood. Dozens of cracks appeared on his body, and blood spilled everywhere. His injuries were even more serious, and his body was hunched over. He was no longer as majestic and domineering as before. Only when he was sent flying 100 miles away did he manage to neutralize the impact and stop in a void. At this moment, Ji Tianxing chased after him with his sword and shouted coldly, "Tianshu, it's time for you to die." In fact, Ji Tianxing did not plan to kill Tianshu directly. He wanted to capture Tianshu and interrogate him with torture or use soul-searching techniques to find out some secrets. For example, the true identity and intentions of the upper realm deities and other secrets. Tianshu held the Neptune halberd with both hands and panted violently. Blood flowed out of his body. However, he stared at Ji Tianxing stubbornly and sneered. "Ha ha! Ji Tianxing, you underestimate me. So what if you can defeat me? I'm immortal. You'll never be able to kill me." As he spoke, Tianshu's body lit up with a dense blue light and quickly healed his injuries. The water-type divine power had a powerful healing effect. He also had the 7 stars glorious yang divine body. It was indeed difficult to kill him. To any true god, he was an extremely troublesome character. However, Ji Tianxing did not find it troublesome at all. He even smiled playfully. "Immortal? What a joke. If I'm not wrong, you've also been baptized by the divine light and jumped from the crossing calamity realm to the martial sage realm. You haven't gone through the 9 tribulations nor been struck by the divine lightning. Now, I'll help you make up for your regrets and let you have a taste of being struck by lightning." MBSB. Hurry up and read it. Chapter 2698. Hearing Ji Tianxing's words, Tianshu's expression changed. Indeed, he was a genius that reigned supreme over the past and present, a genius that was rarely seen in 10,000 years. He had perfectly combined the bloodlines of the heaven punishers and the water spirits, and he had been taught by the divine king. His combat strength was outstanding, and he had dominated the world. His body, divine soul, and bloodline were perfect. He had almost no flaws. But, however, he knew very well that he had a fatal weakness. That was, he hadn't gone through the 9-level heavenly tribulations. But Ji Tianxing knew it. Tianshu immediately frowned, showing a strong vigilance in his eyes. "Ji Tianxing, what do you want?" Ji Tianxing put his left hand behind his back and held the sword of burial of heaven with his right hand. He sneered. "Tianshu, how do you want to be cooked? Bastard." Tianshu was furious and roared, "I swear that I'll cut you into pieces, skin you, and pull out your tendons." Before he could finish, Ji Tianxing had swung the sword of burial of heaven and shot out 9 5-colored sword auras. 5-colored divine lightning. The 9,000-foot-long sword auras were formed by the divine lightning and divine fire of the 4 elements. They were surrounded by lightning and looked like dragons. In the next moment, the 9 divine lightning swords arrived in front of Tianshu and drowned his figure. His divine soul was locked, and he had nowhere to run. At this critical moment, he could only wave the Neptune halberd and release a shield to protect himself. Boom, 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 boom. The 9 divine lightning sword auras hit the azure shield and made a series of earth-shattering noises. In the blink of an eye, the blue light shield was smashed to pieces, and shards of it flew everywhere. Then, the violent lightning engulfed Tian Shu's figure. Kaboom! Crackle, crackle! Divine fire and lightning flashed. The lightning arcs were like dragons, and the loud noises shook the sky. Sky Pivot's screams were mixed in with the black shards and ashes that filled the sky. It was Tian Shu's robe, hair, and flesh, which had been turned into charcoal by the divine lightning. After a few breaths, the 5-color divine lightning that enveloped Dubhe gradually dissipated. Tian Shu's figure appeared. This time, his injuries were terrible to the extreme. It was truly too horrible to look at. The 30-meter-tall body had shrunk to a size of 30 meters. It had completely turned into black charcoal and was still emitting black smoke. He no longer looked like a human. He had turned into a lump of charred flesh, like a charred wooden block. It was both tragic and hilarious. He convulsed incessantly, unable to make a sound and unable to escape. The only thing he could be proud of was that he was still alive. He. I was a little too harsh and roasted you to a crisp. Ji Tianxing grinned coldly and reached out his eagle claw-like left hand to grab the sky pivot. He wanted to capture Tian Shu and slowly interrogate him for information. The giant golden palm was about to grab the sky pivot. However, right at this critical moment, a blinding white light burst forth from the sea god's halberd and swallowed the heavenly pivot. Swoosh! The sky pivot disappeared instantly. It was swallowed by the sea god's halberd and protected. At the same time, the sea god's halberd also disappeared from the void. It unleashed a powerful spatial fluctuation and instantly teleported 1,000 miles away, escaping into the void. The heavenly divine artifact that the queen goddess had spent so much effort to create was indeed amazing. It could protect the sky pivot at the critical moment and bring him out of danger. Ji Tianxing immediately frowned, and a cold light flashed across his eyes. Swish! Without hesitation, he teleported 1,000 miles away and caught up with the sea god's halberd. However, the sea god's halberd was a real heavenly divine artifact. It was extremely powerful. It teleported 1,000 miles away again and left Ji Tianxing behind. If it was an ordinary true god, he would not be able to teleport twice in a row. He could only look at the halberd and sigh. However, Ji Tianxing was special. He immediately teleported 1,000 miles away and caught up with the sea god's halberd again. The sea god's halberd was about to teleport again. Ji Tianxing used his heaven-seizing palm and released a giant dragon claw to grab the sea god's halberd. However, just as the dragon claw was about to grab the sea god's halberd, a burning purple ball of light rushed out from the side. Your Highness, run. We will cover you. In the dazzling purple ball of light was the left guardian in a purple robe. He was already covered in wounds and blood. His hair was disheveled and 2 of his legs were broken. Even though he was severely injured, he still burned his life force to unleash his greatest strength and speed. In order to cover the sea god's halberd's escape, he charged at the heaven-seizing dragon claw without caring about his own safety. Boom! There was a loud, muffled explosion. The left guardian was smashed into pieces by the heaven-seizing dragon claw and exploded into endless purple flames that spread out in the void. The heaven-seizing dragon claw was blocked and paused for a third of an instant. Seizing this opportunity, the sea god's halberd disappeared and teleported 1,000 miles away. Ji Tianxing panicked, and his face was as cold as ice. He did not care about the consequences and was not afraid of the backlash from teleporting continuously. He was about to teleport 1,000 miles again to chase after the sea god's halberd. But at this moment, another ball of dazzling purple flames rushed out from the side, brutally crashing into him. Ji Tianxing, I will fight you to the death. As long as the starry sky is not destroyed, the heavens will be eternal. In the purple flames was the left guardian in a green robe. He was also severely injured. He He was missing an arm and a leg and was covered in wounds. He was already at the end of his rope, even though his strength was only at the 7th level of the true God realm. However, he had the mentality of perishing together with Ji Tianxing. He charged at Ji Tianxing and detonated himself. Once Ji Tianxing was hit, he would be severely injured even if he did not die. Ji Tianxing had no choice but to enter the sword of burial of heaven. Swoosh! With a flash of light, he entered the world inside the sword. Only the sword of burial of heaven was left floating in the void. At the same time, the left guardian rushed to the sword of burial of heaven and exploded. Boom! The purple fireball exploded, bursting forth with boundless purple flames, forming a massive mushroom cloud in the air. The earth-shattering sound spread through the void within a radius of 30,000 miles. The destructive purple flames swept through the void for 30,000 miles before gradually dissipating. The sword of burial of heaven was at the center of the explosion and took the brunt of the terrifying power. However, it was a heavenly divine artifact. The self-destruction of a true God powerhouse was not a threat to it. It was only blasted a few hundred miles away. It was not damaged. A moment later, the purple flames that swept through the void dissipated. Ji Tianxing left the world inside the sword and returned to the void. He looked in the direction that the sea god's halberd had fled and sighed regretfully. The few breaths of time he had wasted was enough for the sea god's halberd to escape tens of thousands of miles away. If he chased after it now, he could only teleport a few thousand miles at most before his divine body suffered a backlash. If he used the heavenly star shuttle, he would directly jump to the nearest star. It would be even more impossible to find the sea god's halberd. The left and right protector's sacrifice had saved Tianshu's life. Chapter 2699. Not long after, Yun Yao and Ji Ke flew back to Ji Tianxing's side. Both of them were travel-worn. Their hair was a little messy, and there were beads of sweat on their foreheads. However, both of them were unharmed and unharmed. They had the upper hand in the previous battle. They had completely suppressed the left and right protectors. Fortunately, the left and right protectors were old monsters who had cultivated for thousands of years. Their divine powers were extremely vast, and they had mastered hundreds of divine powers and ultimate skills. They had many life-saving trump cards. That was why they were not killed by Yun Yao and Ji Ke on the spot. They were only severely injured and on the verge of death. They desperately tried to escape. In the end, they sacrificed themselves to cover Tianshu's escape. Tianxing, what's the situation? Did the left and right protectors self-destruct? Big brother Tianxing, are the left and right protectors all dead? Did you kill Tianshu too? Yun Yao and Ji Ke looked at Ji Tianxing anxiously and asked about the result. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said, the left and right protectors sacrificed themselves to cover Tianshu's escape. Tianshu was severely injured by me, but he escaped under the protection of the sea god halberd. Yun Yao and Ji Ke were stunned. Then, they looked regretful. The sea god halberd? What divine weapon is that? Ji Tianxing explained, that's Tianshu's natal divine weapon. It should be a heavenly god-grade weapon that the celestial empress had made for him. Not only does it have the aura of a primordial divine weapon, but it also has many heavenly god-grade restrictions. Yun Yao and Ji Ke nodded. They were slightly regretful. Unfortunately, we didn't kill Tianshu this time. He'll be troublesome in the future. If only we could capture him. We'd definitely be able to dig out the secrets of the Heaven Punisher race and the god behind them. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said, although it's a pity that we didn't kill Tianshu, I've severely injured him. However, since I have severely injured him, he will definitely escape back to planet Heaven Crusher and recuperate in seclusion for 100 years. Besides, the left and right protectors are all dead. Emperor Heaven Punisher has lost 2 capable subordinates. Hearing his advice, Yun Yao and Ji Ke's brows finally relaxed. That's right. If we can continue to weaken the Heaven Punisher race, our chances of winning will increase. Tianshu is actually hailed as the #1 genius in the starry skies. and here I was wondering how strong he was. I never imagined that he would actually be completely suppressed by Big Brother Tianqing and beaten half to death, and he could only flee in a sorry state. Truly laughable. Tianqing shook his head lightly and said, "Although Tian Shu is not my match, his talent and strength are indeed the most monstrous among the martial artists that I have ever seen. If we don't get rid of this person as soon as possible, in another 200 or 300 years, he will definitely become a great threat to us." Yun Yao said in a low voice, "If that's the case, then the next time we meet him, we must surround and kill him with all our might." Ji Ku said with a smile, "In another 200 or 300 years, at most a few decades, we will reach planet Heaven Crusher and exterminate the Heaven Punisher race." Everyone chatted for a while, and the atmosphere became much more relaxed. Tianqing looked around and asked with a frown, "Where is Bai Long? Why isn't he back yet? Could he be in trouble?" "Don't worry, I will send a message to ask him." Jiku quickly took out a source stone jade slip and sent it to Bai Long. Whoosh. The source stone jade slip flew into the void and disappeared immediately. The three of them stood in the void and quietly circulated their qi, waiting patiently. After about 10 breaths, a jade slip flew back to Jiku. Jiku picked up the communication jade slip and read its contents with his divine sense. Bai Long is fine for now. He has gained the upper hand and is chasing after Tian Shu's warship. Tianqing thought for a while and said, "Tell Bai Long that we have killed the left and right protectors and that Tian Shu has escaped with heavy injuries. Tell him to consider the situation and decide whether to chase after us. If he is not confident, then don't waste time and come back as soon as possible." "Okay," Jiku responded and quickly entered his message into the communication jade slip and sent it to Bai Long. After about 20 breaths, the communication jade slip flew back. Jiku read the contents of the jade slip and said to Tianqing and Yun Yao, "Bai Long said that Tian Shu's warship is a heavenly god-grade warship and that its defense is very strong. He won't be able to catch up with that warship in a short time, and it will be very difficult for him to break through it. Therefore, he doesn't want to waste time and will meet up with us immediately." Therefore, Tianqing and the other two waited patiently. An hour later, Bai Long drove Tianqing's warship back at lightning speed. The three of them boarded the warship. When Tianqing saw Bai Long, he said with a mocking expression, "Looks like you guys fought very fiercely. You chased after him for at least 200,000 miles. Bai Long smiled embarrassedly and explained, "Master, I was thinking for you guys. I tried my best to drive the Black Dragon warship away so that it wouldn't affect your battle. However, the Black Dragon warship's defense is too strong and its power is not weak. I can't break through it in a short time. It looks like I have to find some time to have a good chat with the Golden Mountain King. I have to urge him to develop an even more powerful divine cannon as soon as possible." Tianqing smiled and said, "We'll talk about this later. Let's go to the world ahead first." "Okay." Bai Long nodded and drove the warship toward the world ahead. In a short 10 days, the warship arrived at the world shrouded in white light. This was just an ordinary mortal world that had been occupied by the Heaven Punishers. Tianqing used a small trick to break through the white light barrier and brought the three of them into this world. The Heaven Punishers who had occupied this world had 1 general, 28 golden armored captains, and 3,000 Heaven Punishers. In addition, the Heaven Punishers had also chosen over 1 million elite fighters and refined them into puppets. With these puppets, the Heaven Punishers firmly controlled the entire world. For the past 100 years, this world had been relatively peaceful. However, tens of billions of living beings were living in an abyss of suffering. They were treated as the lowliest slaves by the Heaven Punishers and were enslaved and tortured. After Tianqing and the other three arrived, they only needed 3 days to find the Heaven Punisher's base. It was an extremely well-hidden temple located in an alternate dimension. The four of them easily destroyed the temple and killed the general, a few captains, and a large number of guards. After plundering the resources in the Divine Temple, Tianqing used the name of the Heaven Punishing General to issue a summons to the captains guarding the various continents. Then, the four of them waited patiently in the alternate dimension. A few days later, the captains guarding the various continents brought a large number of heaven punishers and elite puppets back to the alternate dimension. What awaited them was naturally a disaster. In a short 5 days, Ji Tianxing and the other three destroyed 26 warships. They killed 26 captains, 2,000 heaven punishers, and several 100,000 puppets. There were still 2 warships and thousands of heaven punishers left. They were guarding the continents and would not be returning anytime soon. Ji Tianxing did not want to waste any more time. He brought Yin Yao, Ji Ku, and Bai Long and left this world. He had already destroyed the main force of the heaven punishers in this world. He did not care about the rest. Chapter 2700. After that, Ji Tianxing continued to control the 5-element world to travel around the Black Dragon Star Zone. Wherever they went, they killed the heaven punishers and saved one world after another. If they encountered a suitable and resource-rich planet, Ji Tianxing would refine it. Year after year, time flew by. Before they knew it, 10 years had passed. During this time, they had saved more than 40 worlds and killed more than 100,000 heaven punishers and tens of millions of heaven punishers. Ji Tianxing had also refined 4 planets, and his strength had increased by about 5 times. Of course, the 5-element world size had also increased, and its power had also increased. The resources and spiritual chi in the 5-element world had also become richer. The living beings on the various continents were also rapidly growing stronger. Spring of the 11th year. The 5-element world had arrived at the core of the Black Dragon Star Zone. The Black Dragon Star. From afar, the Black Dragon Star with a diameter of 800 million miles was quietly suspended in the void. The entire surface of the star was enveloped by a rich golden light. However, there were countless black light ribbons in the golden light barrier, like thousands of black divine dragons, circling the entire star. That was how the Black Dragon Star got its name. When they were still a few 100 million miles away, the 5-element world started to slow down. When they were more than 100 million miles away from the Black Dragon Star, the 5-element world gradually stopped. To prevent any accidents, Ji Tianxing only brought White Dragon and the 4 divine beasts to the Black Dragon Star. Yin Yao, Ji Ku, Ji Wuhin, and Ji Wushuang stayed in the 5-element world, still cultivating in seclusion in the Divine Tower. Swoosh! Tianxing's battleship cut through the void and headed straight for the Black Dragon Star. Along the way, White Dragon and Qianyu discussed with anticipation. We've been in the Black Dragon Star Zone for more than a decade and saved more than 60 worlds. We've also collected a huge amount of cultivation resources. However, only 10% of the resources have reached the divine level. The remaining 90% of the resources have been integrated into the 5-element world to transform a few continents. The Black Dragon Star Zone is the core of the entire Star Zone, and it has been occupied by the Heaven Punishers for more than 100 years. There must be a huge amount of divine-level resources stored there. White dragons seem to be able to imagine mountains of divine-level treasures and resources, shining with dazzling light. His eyes shone brightly as he rubbed his palms together, looking impatient. Qianyu also smiled and nodded. Previously, in a certain world, I discovered 2 interesting ancient artifacts and gained a lot of benefits. On this trip to Black Dragon Star, he hoped to obtain some interesting things. Old Bai, don't fight with me when the time comes. Before the White Dragon could answer, the Black Dragon added in a low, muffled voice, "Count me in 2. Old White, you're not allowed to snatch it." Bah, am I that kind of person? Disdain was written all over the White Dragon's face as he said proudly, "I was once a monarch god who dominated the god realm and suppressed tens of thousands of gods. Why would I be interested in such trash?" Qianyu revealed a triumphant smile and said, "That's good. Don't slap yourself in the face when the time comes and say that it smells good." Seeing them laughing and fooling around, Luli revealed a thoughtful expression. After a moment of silence, she finally said to Ji Tianxing, "Master, the Heaven Punisher race is deeply rooted in the Black Dragon Star area. They are very powerful. However, there were 300 worlds in the entire star field. Over the past decade, we've only rescued about 60 worlds. The Heaven Punishers in many worlds got the news in advance and fled with large amounts of resources. We've missed them many times. Do you think it's possible that the Heaven Punisher race guarding the Black Dragon Star area has retreated in advance? Before Ji Tianqing could answer, the White Dragon hastily denied it. That's impossible. The Black Dragon Star area is the headquarters of the Northern Expedition Fleet. The Northern Expedition Fleet's marshal has been here for more than 100 years. How could he give it up? Even if he's afraid of Master's reputation and wants to escape with his soldiers and large amounts of resources, he needs the Heaven Punisher race's permission. The Heaven Punisher race went through so much trouble to occupy the Black Dragon Star area. How could they give it up just like that? Yes, Old Bai's analysis is very reasonable. Qian Yu quickly nodded in agreement. After all, both she and the White Dragon want to make a name for themselves in the Black Dragon Star area. How could they accept such an outcome? The Black Dragon thought for a moment and nodded to show that it was impossible. Only Azurite remained stubborn. She calmly analyzed. The Southern Expedition Fleet and the Eastern Expedition Fleet have been destroyed by us. The 3 marshals have also been killed. The left and right protectors are dead. Tian Shu was severely injured by Master and fled back to the Heaven Punisher race. Now, the Heaven Punisher race has fewer and fewer people they can use. If the Northern Expedition Fleet's marshal insists on staying on the Black Dragon Star area, he will be killed by us soon. In another 10 years, the entire Black Dragon Star area will be rescued and the Northern Expedition Fleet will be destroyed. The Heaven Punisher race's main force will be nibbled away by us until they perish. If you were the Heaven Punisher race, would you sit back and watch this happen? The White Dragon and Qian Yu were speechless. That's true. The White Dragon and the 4 divine beasts fell silent. Their eyes were fixed on Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing was piloting the battleship toward the Black Dragon Star area. He had heard the White Dragon and the divine beast conversation clearly. Sensing everyone's gaze, he did not turn around. He said calmly, "Your analysis is reasonable. However, the exact situation depends on the Heaven Punisher race's decision. If the Northern Expedition Fleet's marshal insists on staying on the Black Dragon Star area, it means that the Heaven Punisher race is still recuperating in seclusion. Moreover, the Northern Expedition Fleet's marshal knows that we are coming. He will gather all his elite soldiers and fight us to the death. If the Northern Expedition Fleet's marshal leaves the Black Dragon Star area and we fail to find him, it means the Heaven Punisher race has come out of seclusion. Also, the Heaven Punisher race will gather his most powerful forces to ambush and attack us. Or he will withdraw all his forces to the Heaven Punisher race and fight us there." The White Dragon and the 4 divine beasts were stunned. Then, they looked surprised. "Wow, Master, you had a hunch and predicted the Heaven Punisher race's thoughts. You were able to deduce so much just based on whether the Northern Expedition Fleet's marshal is on the Black Dragon Star area or not. Old G, you are amazing. No matter what the Heaven Punisher race does, we are not afraid. After all, we are powerful. We just have to fight our way through." They were full of confidence and anticipation for the future. They were not worried at all. Soon, 12 days passed. The Tianqing battleship flew across the void and landed on the Black Dragon Star area's divine light barrier. Ji Tianqing used his divine consciousness to check the barrier. He found that the energy waves on the divine light barrier were normal. He then used his divine mystic technique to check the barrier again. However, he did not find anything unusual. The divine light barrier was not reinforced. There were no hidden divine arrays. This result made him have a hunch that Black Dragon Star was probably deserted. Soon, Ji Tianqing broke the golden light barrier and led the group into the Black Dragon Star area. A few days later, the 2 of them and the 4 divine beasts had explored many cities and countries. The result was just as Luli had said. The Northern Expedition Fleet's marshal had already left with his soldiers. Chapter 2701. The Huge Black Dragon Planet. It had 6 vast continents, a few 100 million miles of mountains and rivers, and 40 billion living beings. This used to be a place full of outstanding people, a prosperous world where martial arts flourished. However, The Heaven Punishers had occupied this world for 150 years. The Northern Field Marshal was there personally, commanding more than 50 captains and more than 6,000 Heaven Punishers to control the entire Black Dragon planet. They enslaved 1 billion martial artists and created 3 million elite puppets. In the past 150 years, they greedily seized resources and treasures. The Black Dragon planet had long been riddled with holes, and countless heavenly treasures had been taken away. Until now, the Northern Field Marshal had left the Black Dragon planet in advance with the Heaven Punishers and brought away endless cultivation resources. He only left behind 3 million puppets whose divine souls were controlled to guard this world for the Heaven Punishers. This world was barren and full of devastation. In 2 months, Ji Tianxing and the others had traveled across 6 continents. Everywhere they went, the same scene was everywhere. The zombie-like puppets were still ordering the slaves to excavate mines and collect resources day and night. The slaves were busy on the plains, in the mountains, deep underground, and at the bottom of the sea. When Ji Tianxing and the others encountered those puppets, the White Dragon and the 4 divine beasts wanted to use their divine powers to kill them on the spot. However, Ji Tianxing stopped them. The Northern Field Marshal had led the Heaven Punishers to leave the Black Dragon planet and temporarily give up on this world. They purposely left behind many puppets to help them maintain order on the Black Dragon planet. After the Heaven Punishers kill us, the Northern Field Marshal will return. By then, the Black Dragon planet will be in order, and they will soon regain control of this world. In order to prevent them from succeeding, not only can we not kill these puppets, but we also have to save them. Ji Tianxing explained the reason to the White Dragon and the 4 divine beasts. Then, he released the white light of the scamending orb to purify the puppets. The Heaven Punishers' divine power in their divine souls was removed. Countless puppets regained their consciousness and woke up. They felt as if they had just woken up from a dream. After knowing what they had done, they all cried bitterly and blamed themselves. After all, they were once emperors and leaders of their respective races. After being controlled by the Heaven Punisher, they helped the Heaven Punisher oppress and enslave their people. This was a great humiliation and mistake. Many people were too ashamed to face the common people and wanted to commit suicide to atone for their sins. Ji Tianxing released a divine light to calm everyone down. Then, he earnestly persuaded everyone to turn over a new leaf and lead the people to rebuild their homes and fight against the heavens together. Everyone suddenly came to their senses and knelt down to worship, thanking Ji Tianxing for saving their lives and giving them a new lease of life. Ji Tianxing was deeply gratified. Concealing his merit and fame, he brought the White Dragon and the 4 divine beasts and floated away. For 2 whole months, this kind of thing happened every day. White Dragon and the 4 mythological beasts were bored and couldn't wait any longer. However, Ji Tianxing was never tired of it. He didn't feel tired even after running around every day. He was still in high spirits. White Dragon and the 4 divine beasts were puzzled. Under the instigation of the 4 divine beasts, White Dragon could only find an opportunity to secretly ask Ji Tianxing, "Master, Black Dragon planet is empty. We can't get any benefits here, nor can we kill the Heaven Punisher. Why are we wasting time? Moreover, it's useless for you to save those puppets. When the Heaven Punisher comes back, they will still be controlled and turned into puppets." In response to this, Ji Tianxing smiled and shook his head. He explained, "Why would Master do something that has no meaning? We don't have much time. Why would I waste it for no reason?" White Dragon was even more puzzled. "Then why are you wasting time with a bunch of ants? You don't understand." Ji Tianxing smiled mysteriously and said calmly, "I'm doing good deeds and collecting divine power." White Dragon was stunned and said with a strange expression, "Master, you're not bald. Why do you believe in this?" White Dragon suddenly thought of a possibility and said with realization, "Could it be that you're collecting the power of faith from all living beings? But I've never seen you cultivate the path of faith." Ji Tianxing rolled his eyes and said unhappily, The path of faith is a heretical path among the 3,000 great paths unless I have no other choice. I don't want to use it. Seeing that White Dragon was still confused and wanted to get to the bottom of it, Ji Tianxing was annoyed and could only tell him the truth. All right, since you're so stupid, I'll tell you the truth. Many years ago, when I was still in the Tianxian continent, I obtained a heaven-mending pearl by chance. It was the ultimate treasure of an almighty in the god realm in the ancient times. The gods borrowed it to mend the sky. Ji Tianxing briefly introduced the origin and power of the heaven-mending pearl. White Dragon was very interested and asked expectantly, "Use the power of the heaven-mending pearl to save those puppets." Of course. Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "Ever since I reached the peak of the true god realm, I refined many stars and absorbed vast amounts of resources for the 5 elemental world. Now, my strength has increased by 20 times, and I've reached the half-step god realm. The heaven-mending pearl has been sleeping for many years and has only recently awakened, but it has undergone a huge change. Like a dusty pearl that has regained its brilliance, a divine dragon hidden in the abyss has soared to the 9 heavens. In short, the current heaven-mending pearl is gradually showing the brilliance of a supreme divine item. When I saved those puppets, I used up a little of the heaven-mending pearl's power. However, the heaven-mending pearl collected a large amount of mysterious power from those people." White Dragon's blood surged when he heard this. He asked excitedly, "What power? What effect does it have?" "The effect of reviving the dead and regrowing flesh and bones." Ji Tianxing said with a smile, "Let's call it a life-saving divine light for the time being." "Is it so magical?" White Dragon was even more surprised. His eyes turned and locked onto a certain foreign race, martial saint kneeling on the ground in the city under his feet. Without saying a word, he raised his hand and slapped that martial saint to death. Then, he carried the broken corpse in front of Ji Tianxing and said with a sneaky smile, "Master, why don't you show it to me and broaden my horizons?" Ji Tianxing's face darkened. The 4 divine beasts were also dumbfounded. In the square in the middle of the city, dozens of foreign race experts and more than 200,000 slaves were so scared that they kept quiet out of fear. Everyone was filled with fear. They were afraid that the temperamental gods would slap them all to death. Everyone's psychological shadow was even bigger than their faces. Ji Tianxing glared at White Dragon. Then he stretched out his right hand and flicked out a ray of milky white divine light. Swoosh! The divine light covered the unlucky martial saint's corpse and turned it into a dense ball of light. In the next moment, the mangled corpse recovered at a speed visible to the naked eye. After a short 10 breaths, the corpse returned to its original state, and its pulse and heartbeat recovered. That unlucky martial saint coughed twice and gradually opened his eyes. He woke up with a confused expression. "Calm. Wonderful bookhouse. Calm." Chapter 2702. Where's this? What happened just now? The unlucky martial saint scratched his head and looked around with a blank expression. He only remembered that he was kneeling in the square, kowtowing and thanking the god for saving his life. All of a sudden, a black shadow descended, and he lost consciousness. When he woke up, he found himself lying in the sky. 10 steps in front of him was the white-robed god and 4 mountain-sized divine beasts. The unlucky martial saint reacted and hurriedly knelt on the ground, kowtowing in fear and trepidation. "Please forgive me, Lord God. I was confused and didn't know how I came here. I didn't mean to offend you, Lord God. Please punish me." The unlucky martial saint didn't know what had happened and was afraid that he had offended the god's dignity and angered him. Seeing this scene, not only the white dragon and the 4 divine beasts were surprised. Even the dozens of powerhouses and more than 200,000 slaves in the city revealed looks of disbelief as they let out cries of surprise. Everyone thought that they were seeing things and couldn't believe it. The unlucky martial saint had been slapped to death, and his body had turned into a pile of minced meat. In the blink of an eye, he came back to life and returned to his original state. This was simply a miracle. No, this was a miracle. Only the god of the nine heavens had such earth-shattering methods and opportunities. For a moment, all the martial artists and commoners in the city were inexplicably shocked. They knelt on the ground and kowtowed crazily. The god has shown himself. A miracle. We saw a miracle. The god has descended to the mortal world and saved millions of lives. This is all of our good fortune. To be able to see a miracle with my own eyes in this life. I will have no regrets, even if I die. Hundreds of thousands of martial artists and commoners were so excited that their blood was boiling, and they shouted themselves hoarse. All the commoners in the city were carried away and worshipped Tianqing devoutly and fanatically. Invisibly, thousands of white streams of air converged into the heaven-mending pearl. After a while, the life-saving divine light consumed by the heaven-mending pearl was completely replenished. After 10 breaths, the life-saving divine light accumulated in the heaven-mending pearl had increased by 3 times. And it was still increasing. Tianqing was a little surprised by this outcome. He glanced at the white dragon with a faint smile. Bai Long revealed a sly smile and asked, "Master, did the heaven-mending orb collect double the amount of life-saving divine light?" This effect is not bad, right? Look at those cultivators and commoners. How devoutly they worship you. Tianqing did not say much. He waved his hand and shot out a ray of divine light, sending that unlucky martial sage back to the city. Then, he turned around and left with White Dragon and the 4 divine beasts. Hundreds of thousands of martial practitioners and commoners respectfully watched them leave. They knelt on the ground for a long time before getting up. After a short while, the unlucky martial saint asked someone and finally understood what had happened. He was both scared and excited, and a strong sense of pride grew in his heart. After all, to be able to be slapped to death by a deity and then brought back to life was a great honor. After he calmed down, he quickly checked his body to see if there were any residual effects. In the end, he discovered that his strength had risen by 3 realms out of nowhere. Moreover, the hidden injuries that had accumulated in his body for many years had all disappeared without a trace. Even his physique and talent had been greatly improved. Originally, he was only a rank 4 martial sage. Now, he had reached the rank 7 martial sage realm. Moreover, it was as if he had been reborn. His talent had greatly increased, and he even had the chance to break through to the martial god realm. Such a shocking outcome caused him to tremble in excitement, and tears filled his eyes. He could not hold back his joy and announced this great surprise to the public. Soon, the news spread throughout the square, and over 200,000 people knew about it. Many martial practitioners and commoners were once again shocked, and their blood boiled. Their worship and respect for Tianqing had reached the limit. In less than 2 hours, the news had spread throughout the city. More than 1 million martial practitioners and commoners knew about the deity's descent and the miracle. Thus, the entire city fell into a state of surprise and madness. Everyone prostrated themselves in worship of Tianqing. The martial sage who had profited from the disaster even wanted to build a temple in the city for the commoners to worship Tianqing. After Tianqing left the city, he rushed to the next main city to purify the puppets that were controlled by the heaven-punishing tribe. Along the way, he could clearly feel that the power of the heaven-repairing pearl was still increasing. The life-saving divine light in the divine pearl was growing at an extremely fast rate. Half a day later, the life-saving light increased by 9 times before it gradually stopped. At this time, he rescued a large number of heaven-punishing puppets in an even more majestic main city. Thus, over 100 puppets and 300,000 slaves prostrated themselves before him. Bai Long had nothing to do and killed a young martial sage in front of everyone. He sent the smashed corpse in front of Tianqing. Tianqing was speechless. He had no choice but to release a ray of life-saving light to save the young martial sage. What happened next was exactly the same as before. Hundreds of thousands of martial practitioners who were inexplicably terrified found that the young martial sage had come back to life. They were extremely surprised and shocked. Countless people knelt on the ground and worshipped Ji Tianxing. They shouted that a miracle had appeared and that a god had appeared. As for the young martial sage who had come back to life, his strength had increased by 3 levels. His talent and aptitude had also increased by leaps and bounds. When he announced this news in surprise and joy, the commoners in the city went crazy. Naturally, Ji Tianxing received 10 times the amount of life-saving divine light. While the commoners in the city were still worshipping fervently, he had already rushed to the next main city with Bai Long and the 4 divine beasts. After tasting the benefits, Ji Tianxing was in no hurry to leave the Black Dragon planet. Although the Northern Expedition Marshal had led the Heaven-Punishing tribe to retreat, they had missed their target. However, he had used the Heaven-Repairing Pearl to save countless puppets and had also received a large amount of life-saving light. This not only made the Heaven-Repairing Pearl more powerful, but also made its light more dazzling. At the same time, it also had a heaven-defying, life-saving light that could revive all kinds of dead creatures. In the future, when he led everyone to conquer the universe and fight against the Heaven-Punishing tribe, he would no longer have to worry about being injured. No matter how serious his injuries were, he would be able to recover quickly with the life-saving light. Even if he was killed by the Heaven-Punishing tribe, as long as there was a bit of flesh left, the life-saving light could revive him. With the life-saving light, Ji Tianxing and the others had a guarantee of their lives. This was the true immortal body. 2 whole years passed in the following days. Ji Tianxing had been running around the various continents. Along the way, he had to save a large number of puppets in every city and country he passed by. 2 years later, he had finally traversed the 6 continents and saved 80% of the puppets. The remaining 20% of the Heaven-Punishing tribe's puppets were scattered all over the continents, and in some places where there were few people. Ji Tianxing did not want to waste time searching. Thus, he left the Black Dragon planet with Bai Long and the 4 divine beasts in satisfaction. After 2 whole years of hard work, the result was the Heaven-Repairing Pearl's power had increased by 50 times. The life-saving light stored in it was enough to revive 50,000 dead martial sages. Chapter 2703. As the saying goes, what you lose on the swings, you gain on the roundabouts. Ji Tianxing and the others had killed their way into the Black Dragon planet and failed to kill Marshal Jinbei and seize a huge amount of cultivation resources. However, he had saved more than 2 million puppets and returned the Black Dragon planet to normal, temporarily leaving the Heaven Punisher's rule. Moreover, the power of his heaven-mending orb had increased by dozens of times, and he had also obtained a huge amount of life-saving divine light. Such a bountiful harvest was no less than killing Marshal Jinbei. After leaving the Black Dragon planet, Ji Tianxing and the others returned to the 5 Elements world. A year ago, Yinyao had sent him a message. She asked him about the specific situation, why it took so long, and whether he had encountered any trouble. After all, according to past practice, Ji Tianxing only needed a little more than a month to save a world. At most, it would take him no more than 3 months. Ji Tianxing sent a message back to Yinyao and explained the reason. After returning to the 5 Elements world, he drove it and continued to travel in the void. As time passed, the 5 Elements world passed by one world after another. Most of the worlds had already been emptied. The Heaven Punisher fleet guarding the worlds had already plundered a huge amount of resources and left in advance. There were many puppets controlled by the Heaven Punisher left in the worlds. They were still loyal and helping the Heaven Punisher control the entire world. After entering these worlds, Ji Tianxing spent a lot of time purifying most of the puppets. Therefore, he was worshipped by billions of people and obtained a huge amount of life-saving divine light. The power of the heaven-mending orb was also increasing. Only a small number of worlds still had the Heaven Punisher fleet remaining to control the people and martial artists of various races. Ji Tianxing and the others killed their way into these worlds, killed countless Heaven Punishers, and saved the entire world. This also allowed him to obtain a lot of life-saving divine light, and the power of the heaven-mending orb also increased. However, Compared to purifying those Heaven Punisher puppets, the life-saving divine light he obtained was not much, but it was better than nothing. In the blink of an eye, 12 years had passed. The Five Elements world left the Black Dragon Star Zone and was about to enter the Fan Gang Star Zone. In more than 20 years in the Black Dragon Star Zone, the Five Elements world traveled in a straight line and saved hundreds of worlds along the way. Although there were 300 worlds in the Black Dragon Star Zone, Ji Tianxing and the others had only managed to rescue one-third of them. However, they had slaughtered more than 200,000 soldiers of the Heaven-conquering army, forcing the Northern Marshal to lead a large number of soldiers to retreat. This was equivalent to saving the Black Dragon Star Zone, allowing most of the worlds to regain their freedom. Of course, as long as the Heaven Punishers were not destroyed, the Northern Expedition fleet might come back. Many worlds still had a large number of puppets. Once the Heaven Punishers returned, they would quickly regain control of the worlds. Only by completely wiping out the Heaven Punishers could they solve the problem once and for all. After leaving the Black Dragon Star Zone, the Five Elements realm flew toward the Fangang Star Zone at the speed of light. Between the two star areas, there were two magnificent galaxies that were billions of miles long. Tens of millions of stars of different sizes floated quietly in the galaxy, flashing with dazzling brilliance. Nearly 99% of the stars were barren, devoid of life. However, the stars contained incomparably rich ores, gems, and various other resources. For example, the Divine Star Fire, Divine Void Light, Annihilation Zdian, and so on were all special divine power resources. Although there were living beings on a very small number of stars, they were all powerful individual life forms. For example, there were the star beasts that traverse the universe, nibbling on stars to absorb energy, and the mysterious void realm beasts. Even ordinary martial gods did not dare to provoke those powerful beings. They could easily lose their lives in the void. When passing by the first galaxy, the Five Elements realm stopped. Ji Tianxing picked more than 30 stars that were rich in resources and ores. He refined and devoured them one by one. He had wasted 6 years because of this. However, after the Five Elements realm devoured many stars, its size grew by 40%, and its strength increased by more than 10 times. This also caused Ji Tianxing's strength to skyrocket. It was now 50 times that of a peak true god. Currently, due to the restriction of the Heavenly Ways rules, he could only be considered a half-step heavenly god. However, in reality, his true combat strength was already comparable to a level 2 heavenly god. There was no other person with such a powerful foundation in the entire universe, even if one searched through all 3,000 worlds. When passing by the second galaxy, the Five Elements realm was in great danger. In the dazzling galaxy, not only were there terrifying void storms, divine flames, and annihilation Zdian, but there were also folded spaces. There were even more than a dozen black holes hidden in the galaxy. The situation was too dangerous. Ji Tianxing could not take the risk of bringing the entire realm with him. Therefore, he had to maneuver the Five Elements realm to change its direction and go around the galaxy. A year later, the Five Elements realm flew into the Fangang Star Zone. The void in front of them became quiet. Many worlds with dazzling divine lights appeared. The Five Elements realm quietly approached those stars. Ji Tianxing and the others steered the battleships and sneaked into those worlds to kill the Heaven Punishers. When the Northern Field Marshal had led the soldiers to retreat from the Black Dragon Star Zone, Ji Tianxing and the others were alarmed. In their opinion, the Heaven Punisher had already made the necessary preparations and precautions. The Western Expedition fleet guarding the Fangang Star Zone must have retreated to the Heaven Punisher planet. The Heaven Punisher might have gathered his strongest forces and set up a killing array on the Heaven Punisher planet, waiting for everyone to die. However, the Fangang Star Zone was very peaceful. They searched more than a dozen worlds, and there were Heaven Punisher battleships guarding them. This made everyone let down their guard. They were immersed in the excitement of killing the Heaven Punishers and plundering a large amount of resources. Soon, 8 years passed. They saved more than 30 worlds, killed thousands of Heaven Punisher battleships, and 100,000 Heaven Punisher soldiers. At the same time, Ji Tianxing also purified tens of millions of puppets and obtained millions of life-saving divine lights. The Heaven-Mending Orb's power had also increased by 100 times. It had reached a mysterious level. Ji Tianxing also benefited greatly. His power had increased by another 30 times. He was now 80 times stronger than when he was at the peak of the true immortal stage. He estimated that he was even more powerful than the Heaven Punisher stage, 3 gods from the upper world. Such a terrifying power filled him with confidence. He was looking forward to the day he could reach the Heaven Punisher planet and fight the Heaven Punisher Emperor. He was looking forward to ascending to the divine realm after killing the Heaven Punishers. Without the restriction of the heavenly way, he would instantly break through the Heaven Punisher stage and soar to the Heaven Punisher stage 3. Meanwhile, the 5 Elements world was flying in the void. A few 100 million miles ahead was the core of the entire star zone, the Fangang star zone. Ji, Ku, Bai Long, and the 4 divine beasts were looking forward to it. However, Yin Yao frowned. She looked like she was deep in thought. Ji Tianxing saw a hint of worry in her eyes. He asked, Yao Yao, what are you thinking about? Yin Yao's thoughts were interrupted. After a moment of silence, she said, Tianxing, I have a bad feeling. The Fangang star ahead is very dangerous. Chapter 2704. Yin Yao was very sensitive to all kinds of auras. This was an innate talent she was born with. As goddess Yao Guang's memories continued to awaken, her strength increased rapidly. At the same time, she also gave birth to some mysterious divine abilities and indescribable abilities. For example, her sixth sense was far superior to ordinary true gods. She could often see the past and future, as well as some special scenes in other dimensions. Before this, there were many times when she was depressed. Ji Tianxing asked her why, but she often refused to tell him. Later, the situation became more and more serious. Ji Tianxing, Ji Ku, and the 2 children were all very worried about her. Only then did she tell them the reason. It was because she had seen the scene of everyone fighting on planet Heaven Punisher a few decades later. She saw mountains collapse, rivers stop flowing, and the sky collapse. Billions of divine flames and lightning poured down and destroyed the entire world. Billions of Heaven Punishers were turned to dust. The entire planet was in a terrible situation. It was almost destroyed. When they heard this, Ji Tianxing and the others were confused. They smiled and said, Isn't this a good omen? It means that we will definitely destroy the Heaven Punisher and achieve great victory. However, Yin Yao shook her head and said solemnly, No, not only did the Heaven Punisher turn to dust, but we also suffered great losses and were about to be separated by life and death. I saw Tianxing's body shatter, his flesh and blood scattered between heaven and earth. He was burned to ashes by divine flames. I also saw the 4 divine beasts being torn to pieces. Their divine blood spilled across the sky. Our children, Chun Chun and Yaya, were also seriously injured and on the verge of death. They disappeared without a trace. When Ji Tianxing, Ji Ku, and the others heard this, their smiles froze. Everyone tried to persuade and comfort her patiently. Yao Yao, how could great Emperor Heaven Punisher, Heaven's Pivot, and the Empress defeat us? I have merged with the 5 Elements world. Who can kill me? I will also protect our children. I will not let any harm come to them. Eldest senior sister, don't think too much. These are all baseless guesses. With our current strength, who can do anything to us? Mistress, it's precisely because you're too worried that you've fallen ill from worry that you've given birth to these false fantasies. You must calm your mind and have a good rest for a period of time. Mother, we are true gods now. Even if we can't defeat Emperor Heaven Punisher and Tian Shu, we can still protect ourselves. Don't worry about us. Ji Tianxing, Ji Ku, Bai Long, and the 2 children were all trying to persuade Yin Yao. However, Yin Yao was stubborn and did not dispel her worries. Her eyes were clear and resolute as she stared into the void. Her voice trembled as she said, "I really can see the future. You have to believe me. We were not the ones who caused that tragedy, nor were we the Heaven Punisher race. Instead, it's an incomparably huge palm in the sky that's shrouded in bloody light." Hearing this, Ji Tianqing immediately understood what she meant and flatly denied it. "Yao Yao, you're worrying too much, and you're worrying too much. I understand what you mean. The upper realm deities will interfere with our war and destroy the entire Heaven Punisher planet. Is that right? However, don't forget that the heavenly axiom has restrictions. The deities of the heavenly realm and the dragon realm can't descend to the mortal world, much less interfere with the mortal world's affairs. Even when I reached the peak of the godly king stage, I couldn't interfere with the mortal world's affairs." Yin Yao was speechless. She could only remain silent. Everyone tried to persuade her for a while and then dispersed. Later, everyone was busy saving the various worlds. They were immersed in the excitement of killing the Heaven Punisher race and plundering cultivation resources. They had forgotten about this matter. Yin Yao did not mention the scene she had seen. Everyone pretended that it had never happened. Now, they were about to arrive at the Fanggang planet. Yin Yao looked worried and uneasy again. Ji Tianqing held her hands, and with a smile on his face, he said gently, "Yao Yao, why are you worried about us again? We've been in the Fanggang planet zone for 8 years, and everything has been smooth sailing. We haven't encountered any danger. Even if the Western Expedition Fleet is guarding the Fanggang planet and has gathered 100,000 soldiers here, they won't be able to threaten us." Yin Yao shook her head gently. "Of course it's not the Western Expedition Fleet. How can those useless people harm us? What I saw was countless godly-level powerhouses gathering here and setting up an inescapable trap for us. Countless godly-level powerhouses." Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, "All right, then let's assume that the Heaven Punisher Emperor is here with the 3 great marshals and 100,000 Heaven Punishers to ambush us. Even so, we have nothing to fear. The current Heaven Punisher race had almost no powerhouses left. The left and right protectors, the Imperial Tutor, the Southern Expedition Marshals, and the Eastern Expedition Marshals had all been killed by Ji Tianqing. Crown Prince Tianshu had also been severely injured and was on the verge of death. It was likely that he had not fully recovered yet. The only true god powerhouses who could be ranked were the Heaven Punisher Emperor, Empress Yun Shuiyan, and the 3 great marshals. Therefore, Ji Tianqing and the others were not afraid at all. They were not worried at all. Yin Yao hesitated for a moment and swallowed her words. She looked at Ji Tianqing with a determined gaze and said, "Tianqing, I want to accompany you to the Fanggang planet." Ji Tianqing rejected her without hesitation. "Yao Yao, I'll only bring Ku, the white dragon, and the 4 divine beasts this time. Chen Chen and Yaya have both reached the 4th level of the true god realm and are cultivating in seclusion to reach the 5th level of the true god realm. It's better for you to stay. You can take care of the 2 children and monitor the 5 elements world to prevent any accidents." Yin Yao's attitude was very firm. She insisted on going with Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing could not persuade her, so he had to change his mind. He nodded and said, "All right, we'll do as you say. Ku will stay behind to guard the 5 elements world." Seeing that he agreed, Yin Yao heaved a sigh of relief. Unknowingly, 2 months had passed. The 5 elements world gradually slowed down and stopped 200 million miles away from the Fanggang planet. Looking from 200 million miles away, one could see that the Fanggang planet with a diameter of 700 million miles was enveloped by a layer of silver divine light. On the divine light barrier, one could vaguely see thousands of golden special patterns. They looked like the language of a certain race, but also like the oracle of the upper realm deities. It was very mysterious. Ji Tianqing knew that it was the language of the Brahmin tribe from the ancient times. The Brahmin tribe cultivated the Brahmin divine path. It was one of the more special paths among the 3,000 great paths. Those without the Brahmin tribe bloodline could not cultivate it. The Brahmin divine path had a mysterious and unpredictable power. It had a majestic righteousness that was close to the heavenly thunder. However, the pure-blooded descendants of the Brahmin tribe had long disappeared. The bloodlines of countless descendants of the Brahmin tribe had been diluted by other races and were scattered on many stars in the Fanggang galaxy. Ji Tianxing asked Ji Ku to stay behind. He brought Yun Yao, the white dragon, and the 4 divine beasts with him and flew toward the Fanggang planet on the warship. Chapter 2705. Swoosh. The Tianxing battleship flew toward the Fanggang star like a black phantom. However, the 5 Elements world was 200 million miles away from the Fanggang star. The Tianxing battleship would need at least 10 days to get there. Along the way, the white dragon and the 4 divine beasts chatted. They fantasized about how many troops the West Expedition Fleet had gathered on the Fanggang star and how many resources they had plundered. Yin Yao stood beside Ji Tianxing and stared at the Fanggang star calmly. After a long time, she couldn't help but ask, Tianxing, isn't the divine light barrier of the Fanggang star also formed by the heavenly Tao? Why are there countless Sanskrit markings and patterns on the silver barrier? Ji Tianxing thought for a moment and explained with a smile, I haven't studied this question, so I'm not too sure. However, I'm guessing that countless Brahmins have cultivated the Fanggang martial path and the divine path, forming a powerful special force that caused the divine light barrier to change. Or maybe there were heavenly gods or divine lords on the Fanggang star in ancient times. Only an expert of this level can add a mark on the divine light barrier to increase its defensive power. Yin Yao nodded slightly and continued to ask, what's so special about the Brahmins and the Fanggang divine path? Ji Tianxing smiled playfully and said, I haven't seen a pure-blooded Brahmin with my own eyes, but I've collected some useful information from the various worlds in the Fanggang star field. It's said that the pure-blooded Brahmins look a little like humans. However, the Brahmins are very tall and strong, and both men and women are bald. They have very little body hair, probably only 2 eyebrows, and not even eyelashes. Moreover, the Brahmins have rings of golden patterns on their heads, representing different strength realms and status. The stronger and higher the status, the more golden patterns on their heads. A martial god realm expert would have 8 golden rings above his head. The most powerful true god experts will have 9 rings of golden patterns on their heads. Yin Yao nodded and listened attentively. Ji Tianxing paused for a moment before continuing. The Brahma clan cultivates the Brahma astral divine path, which focuses on cultivating the body and the soul. They disdained to use weapons and armors because their own defense and strength were far stronger than weapons and armors of the same level. Even an ordinary warrior could cultivate an indestructible Vajra body. At the same time, the Brahma race's divine soul was extraordinarily powerful. They could cast many divine soul and mind divine abilities and secret arts. When cultivating one's soul, the most commonly used cultivation method was to sit in meditation. The bloodline of the Brahma clan was very ancient. It could be traced back to the beginning of ancient times. Therefore, they maintained a strong belief in their race. It was said that they worshipped the Vajra war god of the upper realm and worshipped physical strength and the power of the soul. In the ancient legends, the supreme Vajra war god destroyed the stars with his fists and feet, severed the Milky Way, and created the perfect eternal kingdom with his miraculous and boundless spiritual power. After Yin Yao finished listening, she nodded her head and said, if the Vajra battle god really exists, then he should also be a peak divine king. Moreover, he should be the most special existence among the peak divine kings. Ji Tianxing chuckled and said, I don't know about that. Anyway, 1,100 years ago, when I was still in the god realm, I had never heard of such a person. If the Vajra battle god really exists, I'm afraid he's also an almighty from the beginning of ancient times. Yin Yao nodded her head in agreement and said no more. 10 days passed in a flash. The Tianxing battleship crossed 200 million miles of void and arrived at the Brahma star. As soon as the battleship landed on the silver light barrier, a golden Sanskrit imprint with a radius of 10,000 miles bloomed with dazzling golden light. Bam! With a muffled explosion, the powerful golden light swept over and blasted the Tianxing battleship away. The battleship rolled and flew a few hundred miles before it fell into the void. Fortunately, the battleship's quality had reached the heavenly god level and it was not damaged. Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, and Bai Long all frowned. Their eyes became serious. That's strange. The divine light barrier attacked on its own? We've crossed 3-star zones and saved hundreds of worlds, but we've never encountered such a thing. This Brahma star is really strange. Could it be the West conquering marshals doing? The 3 of them and the 4 divine beasts were suspicious and alert. Bai Long, you stay in the battleship. We'll go out and check the situation. Ji Tianxing instructed and handed the control of the battleship to Bai Long. Then, he left the battleship with Yun Yao and the 4 divine beasts and flew near the silver light barrier. He used the God's Eye secret skill and stared at the silver light barrier, carefully observing it. The silver light barrier was very thick and it contained a vigorous heavenly Tao, divine power, and an ancient aura. After a full hour, Ji Tianxing finally saw through the silver light barrier. He suddenly realized that other than the heavenly God-level energy, there were also thousands of formation veins hidden in the silver light barrier. This made him immediately realize that the silver light barrier had been tampered with. I knew it. There are many divine formations set up in the Brahma Star barrier. Not only is its defense strong, but it can also release powerful attacks. Ji Tianxing stared coldly at the Brahma Star barrier. His entire body was filled with a strong desire to fight. It seems like the Heaven Punishers have spent a lot of effort to guard the Brahma Star barrier. While Ji Tianxing was investigating the silver light barrier, Yun Yao was also using her divine skill to investigate the energy in the barrier. Suddenly, she frowned and reminded in a low voice, Tianxing, not only is there a strong Heaven Punisher's divine power in the silver light barrier, there's also a violent and strong divine power aura. That kind of strong and explosive divine power is very similar to the Brahma Star divine power that you mentioned. Ji Tianxing asked in confusion, do you mean that not only are there Heaven Punishers guarding this place, but there's also a Brahma tribe divine spirit who cultivates the Brahma Star divine path? No, there are many Brahma runes on the silver light barrier. It contains the Brahma Star divine power. Just as the 2 of them were confused and discussing it, the silver light barrier around them suddenly lit up with purple and golden light that soared into the sky. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. At least a few million rays of purple and golden light shot out of the silver light barrier and bloomed in the air. They looked like millions of light ribbons or the veins of a spirit array. As the divine light appeared, an incomparably heavy power that suppressed the heavens and the earth silently pressed down. Whoosh! In just 2 short breaths, the 8 million rays of divine light had condensed into an enormous and terrifying light shield above the silver light barrier. The light shield, which had a radius of 100,000 miles, was made up of purple and golden light. It was like an inverted bowl that covered the silver light barrier. There was no doubt that this was an earth-shattering super spirit array. Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, and the others were trapped in this area by this super spirit array. We've never seen such a huge spirit array before. This must be at least 100,000 miles wide, right? This is indeed the Heaven Punisher's ambush. We've fallen into their trap after all. Don't worry. No matter what danger there is, I'm confident that I can get everyone out of here. Chapter 2706. The White Dragon and the 4 divine beasts were all amazed by the size of the divine formation. Yin Yao also gripped the Source Stone divine sword tightly. A look of worry flashed across her eyes. Only Ji Tianxing's expression remained the same. He did not panic and even try to calm everyone down. Although this divine formation with a radius of 100,000 miles had reached the heavenly god grade and was very powerful, he still had many trump cards. No matter what the situation was, he was confident that he could protect everyone. Since the divine formation has trapped us, it's time for the mastermind to appear. I like to see who it is that has the means to tamper with the divine light barrier. Ji Tianxing stood in the void with his clothes fluttering in the wind. He sneered and shouted in a low voice. As soon as he finished speaking, the crowd fell silent. Dozens of dazzling golden lights suddenly lit up in the divine formation. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. In the blink of an eye, 81 golden light pillars appeared in all directions. When the dazzling golden light faded, 81 figures that were thousands of feet tall and looked like mountains appeared around everyone. Ji, Tianxing, Yunyao, and the others all narrowed their eyes and sized up those huge figures. They saw that they were thousands of feet tall golden giants that looked like mountains. Every giant was completely golden, as if they were made of gold. Their bodies were similar to humans, but their bodies were abnormally strong and majestic. The muscles on their limbs and bodies bulged like mountains. Their wide and thick feet stepped heavily on the silver light barrier. Every step they took made a deafening sound. They were all bare-chested, revealing their broad and majestic chests. On their square and dignified faces, a pair of purple eyes exuded a murderous aura. Most importantly, the 81 golden giants were all bald. On their bald heads, there were 9 rings of dark golden patterns that shone brightly. Yin Yao immediately frowned when she saw this. Bald? 9 rings of golden patterns? Tianxing, aren't these the true gods of the Brahma clan that you said cultivated the Brahma astral divine path? Ji Tianxing furrowed his brows in confusion and said, on the surface, those 81 giants are indeed the true gods of the Brahma clan. But that was impossible. Nowadays, pure-blooded Brahmins who cultivated the Brahma astral divine path were as rare as phoenix feathers and Qilin horns. The number of Brahma clan members who could reach the true divinity realm could be counted on one hand. How could 81 true divinities suddenly appear? Aside from the Heaven Punisher tribe, which other tribe has so many true gods? White Dragon suddenly thought of something and hurriedly shouted, I understand. Master's wife, this is definitely the doing of the Heaven Punisher race. Those giants aren't the true gods of the Brahma race. They must be puppets created by the Heaven Punishers. Puppet. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao's eyes lit up as they came to a sudden realization. The two of them released their divine senses to investigate the strength and aura of those golden giants. Soon, they had a result. They are all made of flesh and blood. They are gods with the bloodline of the Brahmin. They are not low-grade puppets made of metal. The strength of these giants is between the 2nd and 4th level of the true divinity realm. Their eyes are purple, and they have the divine power of the Heaven Punisher race in their bodies. It is obvious that their divine souls have been controlled and their minds have been blinded. White Dragon immediately smiled and announced the result. I knew it. These giants are puppets created by the Heaven Punisher race to deal with us. Yin Yao nodded. She still had some doubts as she said, these giants have the bloodline of the Brahmin and have cultivated the Brahma astral divine path. Their bodies are very strong. However, I am very curious. Where did the Heaven Punisher race find so many true gods of the Brahmin? Ji Tianxing did not answer. He looked coldly into the sky and said with a cold smile, the Master is here. We will know the answer soon. Yin Yao, White Dragon, and the 4 divine beasts followed his gaze and looked into the sky. They saw a dazzling purple light fly out of the Brahma astral star. It crossed the cold sky and headed toward the group. Swoosh! In just a few breaths of time, the dazzling purple light arrived above the 100,000-kilometer-wide formation and stopped above everyone's heads. After the purple light disappeared, a blackish-purple battleship that was 3,000 feet long appeared. This was obviously the Heaven Punisher race's battleship, and it was a supreme-grade True Divinity Realm battleship. Its appearance was as ferocious and domineering as before. It was like a fierce black and purple dragon with its claws and fangs. There were more than 300 black cannons on both sides of the battleship. There were also 2 main cannons that looked like whirlpools in the purple dragon head at the front of the battleship. One could imagine that once the battleship fired its cannons, its power would be shocking. Crack, 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 crack. As the heavy sound of metal grinding could be heard, the battleship's huge hatch opened. A tall and sturdy figure stepped out of the cabin door. It was a powerful, middle-aged Heaven Punisher man who was 10 feet tall. His upper body was similar to a human's, and his arms were thick and muscular. His face was majestic and domineering. He had a head full of purple hair and wore a 9 heavens everlasting crimson gold crown. A wide dark golden cape was draped over his shoulders. His lower body was like that of a dragon horse. He had 4 hooves and a dragon tail that shone with golden light. Ji Tianxing recognized him immediately. He was the Heaven Punisher Great Emperor. The Heaven Punisher Great Emperor has recovered from his injuries. He even came to the Fanggang planet personally. No wonder. Ji Tianxing was enlightened. He immediately guessed that the Heaven Punisher Great Emperor must have created the Heaven Punisher Great Emperor and the 81 giant puppets. As the Heaven Punisher Great Emperor walked to the front of the battleship, 3 tall and muscular figures walked out of the hatch. They were 3 muscular men. Although they were of different shapes and sizes, they were all wearing armor and gorgeous cloaks. They were all at LV6 true immortal realm and exuded the majestic aura of a superior being. Ji Tianxing knew immediately that the 3 of them were the 3 surviving marshals under the Heaven Punisher Great Emperor's command: the Northern Marshal, the Western Marshal, and the Protector Marshal. Other than the 3 marshals, over 100 Heaven Punishers clad in golden armor walked out of the cabin door one after another. These people were the generals of the various fleets. They commanded many battleships and were more powerful than the captains. Ji Tianxing scanned them with his divine senses and realized that the most powerful person was at LV4 True Immortal Realm. The weakest person was at LV1 True Immortal Realm. The Heaven Punisher Great Emperor stood proudly on the dragon's head at the front of the battleship. The 3 marshals stood behind him. Behind the 3 marshals, hundreds of golden armored generals were lined up neatly on the deck. They exuded a majestic aura. With such a luxurious lineup and more than 100 true immortal realm experts, they could sweep across the void and crush the 3,000 worlds. Together with the 81 true immortal realm giant puppets in the Heaven Punisher Great Emperor's array, the Heaven Punisher tribe's power was unprecedented. There was a great disparity in strength and numbers between the 2 sides. No matter how one looked at it, Ji Tianxing and the others did not have a chance of winning. The following battle was bound to be extremely tragic. In fact, it was very likely that they would lose their lives here. The Heaven Punisher Great Emperor thought so too. He looked down at Ji Tianxing and the others and smiled confidently. Ji Tianxing, how have you been? We meet again. Chapter 2707. The Great Emperor of Heaven Punisher's confident and mocking smile was very unpleasant to look at. Yin Yao, Bai Long, and the 4 divine beasts were all on their guard. They stared at him warily. Ji Tianxing looked calm. His eyes were full of confidence. He said even more mockingly, "That's right. So soon, we meet again. It seems that you have recovered from your injuries. Isn't this what they say? You forget the pain when the wound is healed. Didn't I teach you a lesson back then? Now you're asking to be tortured?" Hearing that, the 3 marshals and the hundreds of generals of Heaven Punisher frowned. Their faces were filled with anger. The Great Emperor of Heaven Punisher's face darkened. He shouted angrily, "Ji Tianxing, today you are trapped in the heaven-destroying formation that I have carefully set up. There are 81 Vajra war gods here. I have also gathered hundreds of powerful cultivators. I will kill you here and cut you into pieces. Under such circumstances, I don't understand how you can be so arrogant. Maybe you know that you are going to die, so you want to talk before you die?" Hearing that, the hundreds of generals of Heaven Punisher in golden armor sneered. Ji Tianxing was not angry. Instead, he said with a mocking smile, "That's why I said that this is the difference between the weak and the strong. You thought that you had planned for so many years and set up such an inescapable trap. You thought that you were confident. I recklessly barged into the Fanggang Star and fell into your trap. That made you even more proud and confident. But you never knew that I had already guessed your next step when we were in the Black Dragon Star area. I saw through your scheme. I just didn't want to expose it. So, I came to the Fanggang Star with my own scheme. After all, I didn't care about your petty tricks at all. Furthermore, I had to successfully enter your ambush to lure you out." Ji Tianxing said calmly. He told the whole story clearly. The great Emperor of Heaven Punisher's plan was completely exposed. His face turned as cold as ice, and his eyes shone with a fierce light. Bullshit. You're spouting nonsense. The lofty martial Emperor Tian Fa cursed out of anger. However, he quickly calmed down and sneered with a ferocious expression. So what if you have guessed my plan? This wasn't a conspiracy in the first place, but an overt one. In the end, didn't you still step into this Emperor's heaven-destroying great formation and get surrounded? No matter what you say, it's useless. I want to see how you're going to escape. As he spoke, Great Emperor Tian Fa waved his hand and gave the order. The three marshals immediately released dazzling purple divine light, injecting it into the heaven-destroying formation. All of a sudden, the 100,000 miles great array started absorbing the silver light barrier's energy madly. It sped up its operation and emitted an even more dazzling radiance. Buzz! Within the formation, purple light descended from the heavens, releasing a destructive divine power that ruthlessly suppressed Ji, Tianxing, and the others. Under the tremendous pressure, the white dragon and the four divine beasts could not use their divine power smoothly. Their bodies were also slightly sluggish and stiff, and it was difficult for them to move. However, the 81 Brahmin tribe giants were not affected at all. Their auras were still as violent as ever. Ji Tianxing was calm, as usual. He laughed mockingly and said, "Ha, Great Emperor Tian Fa, is this all you've got? A frog in a well who doesn't even know what the heavens are. Actually named your formation the Heaven-Destroying Great Formation? You're really shameless. Your ignorance is laughable. Don't you want to see how I'm going to escape from this formation? Then open your eyes wide and watch. Not only am I going to break this crude formation, but I'm also going to destroy the Vajra puppets that you've so painstakingly created." As soon as he finished speaking, Ji Tianxing raised his right hand. A black light flashed in his palm, and the sword of burial of heaven appeared. He placed his left hand behind his back and held the sword of burial of heaven in his right hand. Boundless divine power exploded from him as he swung the sword violently. Heaven-splitting sword. In an instant, the sword of burial of heaven shone with a dazzling golden divine light. It transformed into a giant golden sword that was 100 miles long. It slashed toward the golden and purple light shield of the formation. He had used all his strength in this attack. The heaven and sword unification technique unleashed the strongest power he could muster. His strength had long reached 80 times that of a peak true god. The power of this attack was close to that of a level 4 heavenly god. This was a genuine sword of a heavenly god. The heaven-destroying Great Emperor Tian Fa had spent so many years painstakingly setting up the heaven-destroying Great Formation. However, it had only just reached the heavenly god level. Kaboom! In the next instant, the giant golden sword slashed into the light shield of the formation. An earth-shattering explosion erupted. The deafening sound waves spread for tens of thousands of miles, causing the void to tremble violently. The destructive shock waves, accompanied by endless golden and purple light shards, exploded in the void, creating a storm that spanned tens of thousands of miles. The giant sword slashed open a 1,000-mile-long and 10,000-foot-wide ditch in the thick light shield of the formation. The golden and purple divine power in the formation leaked out like floodwater and scattered across the void. The light shield of the formation within a 100,000-mile-wide radius shook violently with cracking sounds. With the huge gully as the center, thousands of cracks spread out in all directions. The shocking scene caused the heaven-destroying Great Emperor, the 3 marshals, and the 100 generals to be utterly shocked and in disbelief. Even though they had witnessed it with their own eyes, they still could not believe that Ji Tianxing had managed to break the heaven-destroying Great Formation with a single slash. The heaven-destroying Great Emperor Tian Fa had spent 40 years and countless god-level resources to set up the heaven-destroying Great Formation with the 3 marshals and hundreds of martial gods. In the eyes of the crowd, there was no one in the Trichiliocosm who could use such a barbaric method to directly break the formation. It was not a miracle. It was a miracle. For a moment, everyone was immersed in astonishment. Their bodies stiffened and they could not utter a single word. The same thought flashed across everyone's mind. What kind of monster is Ji Tianxing? What level has his strength reached? Is he still human? How can he be so powerful? Is he an expert from the mortal world? Is he really not a god from the nine heavens? While everyone was still in a daze, Ji Tianxing led Yun Yao, Bai Long, and the four godly beasts through the gap in the formation and flew into the void. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. They left the heaven-destroying great formation easily and returned to the void. They stood 100 miles away from the heaven-destroying great emperor. The 81 Vajra puppets in the formation did not have their own consciousness and thoughts. They were only loyal to the heaven-destroying great emperor. Without the heaven-destroying great emperor's order, they stood in the formation like statues and did not stop Ji Tianxing and the others. When the heaven-destroying great emperor came to his senses and wanted to give the order to attack, it was already too late. Gasp! He stared ferociously at Ji Tianxing and could not help but gasp. Then, he sneered with a bitter look on his face. He. I see. No wonder you ignore my ambush and swaggered into the Brahmastar. You are no longer who you used to be. Chapter 2708. The great emperor of Heaven Slayer's heart was filled with shock and bitterness. He finally understood why Ji Tianxing had dared to barge into the Fan Gang planet despite knowing that he had set up an ambush. Ji Tianxing's strength had increased by more than 10 times. He was now able to ignore any ambushes and plots. In the face of absolute power, all plots and plots were useless and laughable. The great Emperor of Heaven, Slayer, knew this better than anyone else. Because before he met Ji Tianxing, he'd relied on his absolute strength to sweep through the various stellar regions and was invincible before he met Ji Tianxing. Now, retribution had come. He was the one who had been swept away and crushed. Ji Tianxing looked at him with a smile and said mockingly, "Great Emperor of Heaven Slayer, now that you see it clearly, you should understand the difference between you and me. Don't make any more pointless struggles. Just surrender and admit defeat. In the name of the God of War, I will give you a dignified death. Furthermore, if you are sincere in pledging allegiance to me, I can spare your life and bestow upon you the honor of being my personal guard." Ji Tianxing did not want to kill the great Emperor of Heaven Slayer for now. He wanted to keep him alive to find clues about the upper world spiritual beings. It would be even better if he could make the great Emperor of Heaven Slayer submit. Ji Tianxing was once a supreme being who ruled over thousands of deities. It was indeed a great favor to have the great Emperor of Heaven Slayer, who was half a step away from becoming a heavenly god, as his guard. One must know that back in the god world, countless divine monarchs and peerless geniuses wanted to follow by his side. However, he had mercilessly rejected them all. However, when the great Emperor of Heaven Slayer heard this, he was so embarrassed that he almost vomited blood. Ha ha, what a joke! The great Emperor of Heaven Slayer was so angry that he laughed. He roared with a ferocious expression, "Ji Tianxing, that's what I said to you in the past. Now, you are saying the same thing to me. All you did was break my heaven-destroying formation, and you want me to admit defeat and surrender? You are too naive. I am the great Emperor of Heaven Slayer. I am the ruler of all 3,000 worlds. Moreover, I was chosen by the supreme being of the upper world to be the representative of the mortal world. Why do you have to do that? Why do you have to make me submit? Are you worthy?" Ji Tianxing's words were a great blow to Martial Emperor Tian Fa. It was a great humiliation. Even if he were to die here, he would never surrender to Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing was still smiling. His expression was calm, and his eyes were full of confidence. "Whether I'm qualified or not, you'll soon know the answer. You, on the other hand, have missed such a great opportunity and are destined to be reduced to a tragedy." The great Emperor of Heaven Law was even angrier. He bellowed, "Ji Tianxing, you are so arrogant and shameless." Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows disapprovingly and said, "If that's the case, then there's nothing more to say. Let's see who's the real deal." As he spoke, he was about to brandish the sword of burial of heaven and use his ultimate move to attack. Wait! The great Emperor of Heaven, Law, waved his hand to stop him. He asked in a low voice, Ji Tianxing, before the battle, I have a question for you. A few decades ago, when I came to Xiao Star, I beat you up so badly that you ran away. At that time, you were only a LV3 true god. You were captured by me and almost lost your life. Now, only a few decades have passed. How did you reach the half-step to Heavenly God realm and increase your strength by 100 times? This has never happened in the 3,000 worlds for tens of thousands of years. A true God realm elite is considered a rare genius if they can increase their cultivation level by 1 level in a few decades. This question troubled the great Emperor of Heaven Law. He could not believe it and could not understand it. If he could not get an answer, he would forever have a thorn in his heart. Ji Tianxing sneered and said in a playful tone, You really want to know the answer? Easy. Submit to me and be my guard. Then I'll tell you the truth. Bastard, you're digging your own grave. The great Emperor of Heaven Law was enraged. He waved his hand and gave the order to attack. Everyone, listen up. Capture Ji Tianxing for this Emperor. He decided not to waste any more time talking to Ji Tianxing. As long as they captured him, they could interrogate him. Yes, sir. The 3 marshals cupped their fists and bowed. Attack! Hundreds of golden armored generals took out their weapons and roared with murderous intent. The next moment, the 3 marshals led the golden armored generals out of the battleship and pounced on Ji Tianxing. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Everyone spread out and surrounded Ji Tianxing and the others. Then they waved their light blades, which covered the sky and covered the earth, and drowned everyone's figures. Ji Tianxing, the great emperor, and the 4 godly beasts did not hesitate in the face of the attacks from the Heaven Law executioners. The marshals waved their weapons and unleashed their super skills that could destroy heaven and earth. Absolute shadows of 10 directions. Ji Tianxing's body shone with golden light and turned into 10 shadows in an instant. They appeared in all directions. Each of the shadows waved their divine swords and unleashed their sword radiance toward the 3 marshals and the golden armored generals. Milky Way strike. Yun Yao waved her Dawnstone divine sword and unleashed a Milky Way strike toward the Heaven Law executioners who were charging toward her. Sky Roaring Dragon. Bai Long waved his Dawnstone heavy sword and unleashed 2 white dragon shadows that were tens of thousands of feet long. They charged toward the golden armored generals. Qian Yu, Black Dragon, Azure Glaze, and Lan Kuan also unleashed their ice radiance, divine flames, and light blades. Both sides were true immortal realm elites. The super skills that they unleashed had the power to destroy heaven and earth. The divine radiance and light blades clashed fiercely in the void, creating a deafening explosion. The violent shockwaves created ripples in the void along with the colorful divine radiance shards and created an earth-shattering storm. Soon, the first clash between the 2 sides had ended. The outcome surprised the Heaven Law executioners. They could not believe their eyes. Their divine skills had been blocked by Ji Tianxing and the others. Ji Tianxing, the marshals, and the 4 divine beasts were only slightly injured. However, the 3 marshals and the golden armored generals had paid a heavy price. More than 20 generals had been severely injured. More than a dozen of them had been killed on the spot. Even the 3 marshals were sent flying by Ji Tianxing's sword radiance. Cracks appeared on their armors, and their helmets fell to the void. They looked rather pathetic. The Heaven Law executioner was so shocked that he could barely keep his composure. If Ji Tianxing was the only one who was powerful, then so be it. However, Yin Yao and Bai Long beside Ji Tianxing were also very powerful. One of them was at LV9 True Immortal Realm, and the other was at LV8 True Immortal Realm. Even the 4 divine beasts that were as large as mountains had reached LV7 True Immortal Realm. What was going on? Such a terrifying lineup of elites was comparable to the Heaven Law executioners. Moreover, Ji Tianxing was as powerful as a heaven god. The Heaven Law executioner finally panicked. He quickly ordered the 81 Vajra puppets and roared, "What are you waiting for? Kill them all for this emperor. Kill Ji Tianxing at all costs." End of chapter.